It all happened in the first year of the War of 10,000 Races, when countless monsters filled the earth and made it a battlefield for all creatures. One day, the number of monsters became disproportionately large, and it seemed as if only they were allowed to rule fate and decide the world order. And although at the beginning of the war there were people with superpowers among humanity, their numbers were so small and they were so poorly prepared for battle that humans found themselves at a disadvantage. Humanity had no choice but to use firearms and nuclear weapons, and they barely managed to erect 10 defensive lines that could somehow hold back the onslaught of the unexpected guests. But, unfortunately, after 10 years of war, 2 defensive lines fell, and people were forced to retreat. The deplorable situation worsened. The number of victims increased, and everything was getting closer to the point that no one would survive. According to statistics, since the beginning of the war, the number of people killed during the defense in the Eastern Alliance alone has exceeded 1 million. And now, when weapons have become fewer and people with superpowers more numerous, all states have turned to such people for help, requesting support on the battlefield. To reclaim their native lands and ensure a peaceful existence for the Earth, humanity had to constantly increase the size of its army and engage in combat with foreigners. Therefore, just 10 years after the start of the War of 10,000 Races, the largest conscription of all time was announced. In this bloody and merciless war, many people of all ages died, and most of them were children who had just reached adulthood. People understood the seriousness of the situation and what was happening around them, so they took various actions, like Sule, for example. She was only 22 years old, and she sacrificed herself by surrounding herself with explosives to prevent the monsters from crossing the bridge. The death toll over the past month has been incredibly high, as if the army was fighting only to kill. Meanwhile, the veteran mayor declared that their deaths were not in vain, and they would definitely avenge them, because they were all their friends. They were all heroes of the Chinese state. It was a truly touching moment, when no one even tried to contain their emotions in order to appear strong in the eyes of others. The mayor also announced that the 9th line of defense had fallen several months ago, and if the creatures continued in the same spirit, they would reach their city of Yecheng, which was part of the Eastern Alliance. However, despite the fact that most of the soldiers did not return and the defensive lines fell one after another, the younger generation still did not lose heart and was ready to fight. No one wanted to be left out. And moreover, no one needed to be dragged into the army by force since the majority joined its ranks voluntarily. The situation was critical, so as many manpower as possible were needed in different areas. And one of these volunteers was a guy named Zeing, 20 years old, born in the city of Yecheng, a student at the Faculty of Architecture of the Yecheng University of Technology. And at that time, he had not yet awakened his superpowers. The first priority was to recruit soldiers who were ready to fight on the front lines, for which they were respected and given various bonuses. But Zeing was not like that. He declared that he wanted to remain in the rear. His decision caused a strong reaction, and no one supported him, because it was believed that only children, old people, and women had the right to remain in the rear. Despite pressure from those around him and attempts to dissuade him, Zeing did not change his decision and firmly stated that this was his choice. Even his classmates, who were nearby at the time, condemned him, but the boy didn't care what anyone thought. But among the crowd of condemners, there was one person who said that there was no reason to humiliate Zeing just because of his choice. That man was the veteran mayor, and he noted that it was, of course, a pity that Zeing had decided to remain in the rear, since his results had been quite indicative, but he did not try to dissuade him. Zeing became a rear-line soldier, after which he went to get his uniform, and all the way he was accompanied by shouts that he was a coward and a traitor. The next day, the newly assembled army unit set out to carry out combat missions. All the soldiers were confident of their victory, and none of them thought that they could die. At this time, Zeing only watched as young, barely trained soldiers were led to certain death. Meanwhile, the internet was furiously discussing Zeing's situation, but no one spoke in his defense. Everyone simply insisted that a hero who did not die on the front lines did not deserve to live. Zeing knew that they were all right about him to some extent, but the battle they were sending the young soldiers into was more like moths flying into a flame. People who are gathering an army of millions still underestimate the power of extraterrestrial races, and this was the main problem. In his previous life, Zeing also joined the army early and went to the front lines. He was among the military command and became an experienced strategist. And while humanity was gradually retreating, Zeing devoted his entire life to studying the 5 talents, which he protected like a tree within himself. Zeing believed that by cultivating the 5 talents to the required level and forming an army around him, He could turn the tide of the battle, but humanity fell before he could, and as a result, he died at the hands of the strongest being among the 1,000 races. However, back then he refused to believe in such an outcome, saying that if only he had managed to develop his talents a little earlier, he would have been able to protect humanity. Zeing began to wonder if it was his obsession or if it was fate, but suddenly he was able to be reborn, and with him, the talent tree. The first was the beast taming talent tree, which allowed the taming of any race while simultaneously empowering them and controlling their actions, followed by the elemental talent tree, which allowed for the mastery of forbidden spells using various elements. Next came the Asura talent tree. The more kills committed, the stronger the body becomes, and when the number of kills reached a certain number, the carrier turned into Asura, a demon capable of destroying everyone. And the last two were the formation talent tree. Mastering various formations with limitless possibilities allowed one to spread one's power, and the undead talent tree, awakening spirits and creating controllable undead. Although leveling up these 5 talents required a large amount of primogems and time, once Zeing reached the maximum level, even if he was left alone, he would be able to resist all creatures. And the reason he decided to stay in the rear was simple. If he went out onto the battlefield now, he wouldn't be able to kill the required number of monsters to obtain the attributes for leveling up, only needlessly risking his life and strength. Therefore, if Zeing wanted to obtain as many origin stones as possible, the best way was to go to the testing ground where countless monsters lived. The young man decided not to delay, so he immediately went to the testing ground in the rear of the Yecheng city base in order to obtain the origin stones and level up his talents as quickly as possible. The testing ground was created in the first year of the war to train superpowers, but soon became just a warehouse for monster corpses, since no one came to train anymore. The workers at the testing ground often thought it would be better to get rid of all the creatures and turn the monsters' bodies into rations for the military. At that moment, Zeing appeared to them, saying that he had come to the testing ground, since it seemed like they could use some extra hands there. A girl named Xiaolu greeted him with a smile, saying that he had arrived just in time and asked him to come with her so she could show him where he could change. However, not everyone was happy about Zeing's appearance. Auntie Wang, who had worked at the site for a long time, was interested in why the young man would come here at such a time. She immediately remembered something that had recently been hotly discussed in the news. A young man named Zeing from the city of Yecheng refused to go to the front lines. Zeing aroused even more interest among the others. Many began to think that his conscience had finally awakened, and he had decided to become more active. Besides, the extra hands really weren't that bad. Liu was also interested in the young man. He became her hope that they could finally make at least a little progress. Moreover, despite his silence, the girl found him quite handsome. However, her romantic thoughts were interrupted by Aunt Wang, who warned Liu that this young man was the same Zeing who had chickened out and refused to go to the front lines. Liu was extremely surprised because, if he was a coward, then why did he suddenly decide to come to the training ground and fight mutants? Meanwhile, Zeing had begun an A-level test, and no one had ever taken this type of test before. As soon as Zeing confirmed the start of the test, a horde of monsters immediately descended upon him. This was the beginning of a long night in which humanity had no way back, and for the sake of the future of the entire race, the question faced the young man. Was he ready to become a shadow that would remain only in the night? Is he ready to sacrifice everything to save everyone, even if he is hated and despised? Zeing understood that there was no turning back, so there was only a series of battles ahead. And the first thing he wanted to start with was the talent of taming animals. In his past life, on the front lines, the young man had already encountered not only foreigners but also animals, such as the big-head bird, which has muscle memory and its weak spot is the back of its head. The mechanism for obtaining attributes remains the same as in the young man's previous life. By killing one big-headed bird, you can get one source stone, and also add a tamed mutant beast to your piggy bank after killing it. However, Zeing was still a weakling, so he had to be careful not to die out of stupidity, and by avoiding serious injuries, he hoped to deal with all the beasts in a short time. After this, the young man plunged into the world of battles with mutants, fighting not only for his life but also for the future of humanity. The battles were very exhausting for him, and sometimes it seemed easier to retreat and surrender, but he continued to do his job. However, it didn't end with just the low-level monsters. Among the crowd of mutated beasts was also the strongest, the king of the head-headed birds. He was significantly different in strength and skills from the other monsters, One could say that he was the boss of the trial. Despite the fact that the young man's physical skills left much to be desired, he did not give up and continued to fight, inflicting more and more damage on the beast. By then it was already time for lunch, but Aunt Wang and Liu were in no hurry to go to the dining room, saying that they wanted to watch this performance for a little while longer. They were sure that Zeing would soon run away home, but they didn't want to let that happen. Liu noted that he had chosen an A-level test, equivalent in difficulty to the front lines, but they couldn't be persuaded otherwise. After some time, it was announced that the first floor of the A-level challenge had been completed by participant Zeing, thus setting a new record by killing 2,000 monsters. This caused great surprise among the others. They could not believe that Zeing did not retreat, but was able to pass the A-level test. He was all wounded, as if there was not a single living place left on him. Nevertheless, the young man was able to prove his worth. Now the main problem was to deal with all the corpses, of which there seemed to be not 2,000 but hundreds of thousands. During the break, the young man decided to review his talent tree statistics. He had managed to tame 2,000 beasts, raise his tamer level to the second, and the tamed beast to the first. At the same time, it was announced that the army would soon begin an offensive, and then the young man realized that the son of the Thunder Punisher and the Fire Colossus, people with 7th-level superpowers, had already arrived at the front lines. However, in their past life, they died almost immediately after entering the battlefield. The situation on the front lines was unpredictable, and the losses became even greater. On top of that, there was very little time left before the fall of the 8th defensive line, which meant that in order to change anything, it was necessary to race against time. Meanwhile, Aunt Wang and Li continued cleaning the corpses, and Li noted that the young man had really tried hard, since no one had ever managed to pass the A-level test before. But Wang continued to hate Zeing for staying behind, saying that getting everything at once was useless and that everything should be approached gradually. She also noted that he had suffered some serious injuries and might not return to action, having finally started to shirk. However, their guesses turned out to be wrong, and after only a short rest, Zeing decided to continue on to the second floor. Wang was extremely surprised when she asked him if he really wanted to go up to the second floor with such injuries. Liu also tried to dissuade him, saying that the beasts on the second floor were even bigger and stronger, and suggested that he rest a little while they looked for volunteers. But Zeing insisted and declared that he was used to doing everything alone, so he would go alone, right now. As a result, no one dared to stop him, and he went on to take the second floor of the A-level test. The atmosphere there was much more tense, and the monsters were much stronger, as if there was heaven and earth between the first and second floors. The young man was confident that he could handle it, but the unexpected happened. Monsters appeared that were beyond his strength. Zeing had no advantage over such beasts, and his previous injuries were still making themselves felt. However, the young man did not give up, because no matter how naive he seemed, he would not have attacked without proper preparation. Zeing decided to use all his skills and all his available strength, and managed to pierce one of the huge monsters. Moreover, since the second-level mutant beast could be tamed, he couldn't complete this floor by simply exterminating them. Zeing used the talent Beast Taming, and it was as if an unknown power had awakened within him. The monster's eyes immediately changed, and a huge sparkling field appeared around the young man, knocking the beasts off their feet. 3 days later, Zeing managed to clear the second floor, killing over 10,000 beasts, and raised the level of his tamed beasts and beast tamer to 6. Now he can go to the wasteland this evening. In theory, even a level 5 person could go there, but due to the threat of people with superpowers and firearms, the beasts are ready to storm the city. In Zeing's case, taming beasts is a key part of his plan to fight all monsters. Meanwhile, while the young man was lost in his thoughts, one of the landfill workers approached him to ask if they would have to work overtime today. But Zeing replied that it wasn't worth it, since he would be leaving early today, and Wang immediately said that he was probably chickening out and would now shirk. However, not everyone supported Wang, saying that she was wrong to hate the young man, since it was thanks to him that their work had advanced a little further. Van tried her best to deny that the young man was not a coward, but a capable guy, but it became more and more difficult to do so each time. Liu approached Zeing, saying that his progress in the tests was truly amazing, and suggested that he take a short break since he had done a lot of work. However, Zeing replied to her that he still had some things to do, so there was no time to rest, and in the meantime, a bunch of wounded had been brought into the city. Watching this, the young man was somewhat in despair, watching how people were thoughtlessly sent to their deaths under the pretext of defending the motherland. At the same time, rockets flew across the sky, and this was not a good sign. It meant that the front line was not coping and was requesting reinforcements. Zeing also understood this and realized that the day of the fall of the front line was getting closer, and the time to become stronger was getting shorter. The young man decided to go to the wasteland to find a way to level up his talent tree faster. A group of soldiers were also moving through the wasteland, but an unexpected situation occurred. The vehicle suddenly broke down. However, they couldn't stay in one place for long, because there were a lot of mutant wolves nearby. And at that moment they noticed a strange silhouette running straight towards them. That someone was none other than Zeing, who ran straight into the mutant wolves' lair. The boys started to worry that something would happen to him and shouted at him to stop, but Zeing didn't listen to them. However, the head doctor had already called the soldiers several times and asked them to hurry, as he needed them. The boys were about to leave when suddenly what they feared most happened. They were attacked by mutant wolves. The two soldiers tried to escape, but by that time the wolves had already reached them. However, they did not retreat and decided to try to escape, after first trying to kill one of the monsters. Then gunshots rang out, which Zeing also heard. And he wanted to go to their aid, but it was not easy. The fact is that the young man himself found himself in a difficult situation. He was surrounded by mutant wolves. But the young man didn't consider this a problem, rather a gift from fate, since this way he would be able to save energy. Meanwhile, the two female soldiers continued to try to break away from the monsters, but they were having difficulty doing so. Zeing was fighting the wolves at the same time, trying to remain vigilant so that the monster wouldn't accidentally hit him. Moreover, the leader of the mutant wolves was among the rest, and this also played into the young man's hands. Zeing knew that in order to save the medical team, he had to first deal with the pack, and especially their leader. At that moment, the young man used the talent Taming beasts, and everything around him seemed to suddenly begin to change. Zeing's skills had indeed improved since the first test, and he was now even able to subjugate the mutant wolf leader. After all, as the saying goes, if you shoot at a horseman, first shoot at his horse. Following this, Zeing attacked the leader because if he tamed him first, everything would be easier. Meanwhile, the medical team continued to try to escape, despite all the difficulties. And suddenly, the unexpected happened. The car suddenly stalled and refused to start. The wolves then immediately attacked, gnawing at the car's body like a pillow. But what was even more surprising was that the wolves suddenly retreated. Their eyes turned bright blue, and they themselves became friendly. And there was an explanation for this. Zeing was able to tame the leader, and then the rest of the monsters. Meanwhile, Zeing was also able to raise the level of the tamed beasts and the beast tamer to 7. The young man couldn't even imagine that he would acquire such pets in such a short time. Nevertheless, he decided to let the wolves go for now and head to other uninhabited areas to tame all the monsters there, because he needed an army of mutant beasts for the war. He also wanted to help the medics get to the city, but suddenly received a message from the warehouse about an urgent meeting where his presence was mandatory. And this meeting was not connected with good news. On the contrary, the management stated that the landfill had greatly disappointed them. They said they had hoped the training ground would meet its targets and be able to assist the front lines, but they had not lived up to their expectations. The test site participants tried to explain the situation, saying that this was their first encounter with mutant beasts above level 4, and that the people left in the rear were mostly elderly. They also added that they needed time to understand what they were dealing with, which further angered management. The leadership didn't like the fact that the training ground needed time, because there wasn't enough food on the front lines, and there were few animals left in the rear, so they had to exterminate the stronger ones. The mayor noted that they would try to do something about it and send more people, but the commander said that he did not see anyone capable among them. Liu countered that it wasn't exactly like that. It was just that 4th-level beasts were beyond Yecheng's capabilities. However, the commander didn't care. He just kept repeating that they were all useless and that no one could be relied on. At this point, Aunt Wang, no longer able to contain herself, intervened and said that her husband and 3 sons had died on the front lines defending the motherland, and that the irresponsible ones were the command. The command also did not tolerate such words and was already planning to use force. However, at that moment the long-awaited Zeing appeared and knocked out the commander's guard with a powerful blow. But the commander did not want to forgive the willfulness, took out a pistol, pointed it at the young man, and asked if he was planning a rebellion. Looking at him, Zeing immediately recognized him. In his previous life, he became a traitor who got rich in the war. He was executed in the 12th year, and his name was Bloodsucker from the Supply Line, Lin Yukai. Yukai was reselling military supplies destined for the front lines, and when it all came to light, it was revealed that he had caused enormous damage to the country. He's probably monitoring the city's speed so that Yecheng can exterminate more high-level beasts, under the guise of helping, but in reality for resale. Zeing knew he needed to be dealt with, but first he needed to be drained of all the resources he had hidden. After Yukai pointed a gun at the young man, the crowd rioted, and everyone shouted that he was the one who was irresponsible for threatening those who were working for the front lines. Nevertheless, he also recognized the young man, said that he was the same coward from the news, and asked whether, after refusing to serve, he really had the audacity to raise his hand against a soldier. After this, Yukai ordered the elimination of the young man, but Zeing reminded him that it was he who had killed tens of thousands of monsters here, and by killing him, they would lose their food. Zeing added that the monsters had already reached the level where they could possess people, and no one in the training grounds could handle it, so they would have to wait for a masterclass in extermination. Yukai realized that he was in a very difficult situation, and judging by the reactions of the others, the young man was telling the truth, so he had no choice but to accept it. Besides, having such a soldier in the rear would be beneficial to him, so Yukai decided to give him a military order. Tomorrow he would send 5,000 level 4 monsters here, and if the young man completed the task within a week, he would not touch him again. However, if the young man fails and fails, then his debt will become the responsibility of everyone present. After this, everyone became worried and said that they would help him, but Zeing assured them that he would handle everything himself and that they had nothing to worry about. However, level 4 monsters were highly defensive and could also interfere with a person's mind. Moreover, the attributes from them could be sold for a lot of money. And at that moment, the young man realized that Yutsai had found a way to make money even here. But this also became a plus for Zeing, because this way he would be able to level up the Asura tree, kill monsters, improve talents, and finish off Yukai. The next day, as Yukai had promised, 5,000 monsters were delivered to the Yecheng training ground. The full order was as follows. Zeing, a soldier from the Yecheng City Logistics Division, is obligated to eliminate 5,000 level 4 monsters and is given 1 week to complete the task. In addition, as a soldier under Yukai's command, he is suspected of disobeying orders, inciting workers to riot, and attacking higher-ranking soldiers, and will be shot if he fails to comply. Execution was a cruel punishment, but no one could challenge the order. In case of failure, one of Yutsai's subordinates was ordered to shoot the young man. He was sure that Zeing would fail and shoot him personally, but the young man replied that he was talking too much to convey an order. However, he did not attach any importance to Zeing's words, noting that it would even be useful for him to speak out before his death. Before Zeing went to fight the monsters, the others warned him that they usually used chloroform smoke for this, but almost all the anesthetics had been taken to the front lines. However, Zeing didn't look worried, even though these monsters could affect a person's soul and mental state. However, no one believed in the young man's victory because everyone was sure that he would fail the task before the week was up. Moreover, even if the young man survives, he will most likely go mad and not realize that he is dying. On top of that, even if Zeing showed himself, the soldiers had already figured out how to prevent him from doing so. At the same time, Zeing was surrounded by monsters, and although they were paralyzed, he felt their mental pressure. In addition, they could create illusions that would be extremely difficult for an ordinary person to cope with. However, Zeing was not an ordinary youth or soldier. He was on a completely different level from the others. The monsters didn't limit themselves to illusions alone and tried to shackle him in other ways. At that moment, ominous thoughts began to creep into the young man's head, trying to subjugate his mind. This put a lot of mental pressure on him, and the monsters were also digging into his memory, reminding him of his father's death. Zeing's consciousness gradually became clouded as the monsters tried to lure him to their side. But the young man was not so easily broken by simply uttering ominous phrases and reminding him of his losses. Zeing declared that no matter how weak he was now, he would soon become the strongest and avenge everyone at any cost. There was an ominous energy floating around him that he wanted to harness. Once he activated Asura's talent, his physical and mental strength would begin to grow exponentially. Zeing began to fight the darkness that was trying to penetrate his mind, but it was not as easy as he expected. Meanwhile, Yukai continued his scams, reselling food intended for the front lines. The demand for goods grew every day because all countries were having problems, and Yukai wanted to earn as much as possible, despite the fact that his subordinates also took a cut. Moreover, Yukai was wary of secret inspections by the military and wanted to find a place where he could work with high-level mutants without risk. At that moment, he received a call with news regarding an order concerning the training ground, and Yutsai was sure that it would be about the death of a young man. However, everything turned out differently. Only 4 days had passed since the start of the mission, and Zeing had already killed almost all the monsters. Yukai was extremely surprised and could not believe the truth, and he was also informed that the young man did not receive any serious injuries. Nevertheless, Yukai was even a little happy and ordered that he be watched, and if he started acting suspiciously, he would be shot immediately. At this time, Zeing was studying the talent tree. He raised Asura to level 5, he was only 500 experience short, and he opened the talent Blade of Evil, which adds a cut effect that ignores enemy defense for 5 seconds. Over the past few days, he had grown stronger both physically and spiritually, and although he hadn't yet reached level 6, he had already mastered Asura's first skill, and the ability to penetrate deeper into the wasteland and fight high-level monsters accelerated his progress. Meanwhile, Aunt Wang finally changed her opinion of the young man, declaring that it was Zeing who raised their reputation. Otherwise, they would have continued to look down on Yecheng. However, Zeing's success did not please Yukai's subordinate, and despite the order not to touch the young man without good reason, he decided to get into his mind using his abilities. Zeing had already suspected that this might happen, and because the skill upgrade had enhanced his perception of the enemy's spiritual power, he was not worried. Since Yukai's subordinate possessed spiritual powers, he wanted to confirm whether Zeing was truly an ordinary youth. He wasn't even stopped by the words of the level 5 soldier who also obeyed Yukai. In the end, he still tried to use his abilities on the young man, even despite Yutsai's prohibition to do so without his knowledge. Zeing felt the spiritual attacks, but as expected, with his current level, such minor attempts did not pose a threat. Moreover, the young man decided to test his new skill, and now his opponent was trapped. At first, everything around was plunged into darkness, but in an instant it was replaced by a bright and colorful picture. However, this colorful picture did not bring goodness, but only darkness and destruction. Yukai's subordinate failed to do anything. Zeing penetrated his mind and took control of him. The young man possessed spiritual power, fueled by demonic energy, so powerful that the enemy had no chance of resistance. After that, he went crazy and started behaving strangely, running in circles and shouting that he was the real boss and that all the money in the world would be his. A soldier nearby realized that he had gone mad, probably due to the effects of the remaining spiritual energy. He realized that such words and actions could undermine Yutsai's authority, so he decided to try to bring him to his senses with a strong blow. He then approached Zeing, and since he showed no signs of life, he thought that the young man was also dead. After this, the soldier went to Yutsai to report what had happened, and to say that the young man was no longer of use. However, he had no idea that Zeing was actually much more capable than he seemed and possessed incredible strength. After all this monster-slaying marathon, Zeing needed some rest, and without realizing it, he slept for more than 2 days. Meanwhile, Aunt Wang sent everyone to continue working, because if everything was okay with the young man, they needed to hurry, otherwise they might not make it in time. Zeing asked her if Yukai had really sent more monsters, but Wang replied that no, it was just that half of their people had been transferred to other training grounds, and the amount of ammunition for the front lines had been doubled. In addition, the 9th defensive line was destroyed, and humanity finally retreated to the 8th. The battles were fierce, and neither in the sky nor on the ground could the military be compared to the high-level monsters. Even the Thunder Strongman who reached level 7 lost an arm, and the Fire Giant, who reached level 6, died heroically. Zeing knew they would fall, but he didn't think it would happen so quickly, even faster than in his past life. Aunt Van also said that a verdict had already been reached regarding the altercation between him and the officer. Senior officials had determined that the officer was under the influence of a mental attack and that the training ground was not at fault. However, there was something else she wanted to tell, and she confided this to Liu. Liu said that all the workers who supported Zeing unanimously elected him as the head of the testing ground at the Yecheng branch of the Judicial Tower. Zeing was shocked and didn't know how to react or whether to sign the appointment document. Nevertheless, he still agreed, and from now on he was called neither master nor boy, but chief. Liu also said that the task set by management had become much more difficult, and the number of workers had halved, while the required ammunition had increased even more. Moreover, the workers couldn't last long without food, water, and sleep. So Liu asked Zeing what they should do now. Zeing understood that the workers could not do better, and the only one who could increase productivity was himself, relying only on his own abilities. This way, even if the workers take frequent breaks, it won't affect the completion time of tasks, and when resources are depleted, he can easily deal with Yutsai in his new position. Liu said that in such a situation she should contact her superiors, but Zeing replied that he had already thought of something. He immediately got out of bed, and Liu tried to stop him, saying that he needed time to recover. However, Zeing exceeded their expectations and stood confidently on his feet as if nothing had happened. But suddenly he noticed a strange silhouette, as if someone had rushed past at incredible speed. Zeing decided to follow this silhouette and immediately ran in that direction. So he found himself on the street, but there was no one around, and he began to think that he had lost the trail. However, just when he thought he had missed the silhouette, a girl appeared behind him, put a gun to the back of his head and said that she would ask questions, and he had better answer correctly. She asked him what the next batch of goods for the order he took from Yutsai was, and who would deliver this batch to him, they or he himself. Zeing replied that it would be better for her to find out about this from Yukai himself and his subordinates. The girl was sure that he was also subordinate to him, and the moment she let her guard down, Zeing took advantage of this by using Asura's talent. However, he was unable to knock the pistol out of her hands. After all, the girl had some skills, but he managed to block her shot. Zeing said that he did not obey Yukai, to which the girl asked him why he was helping him then. The young man replied that he was not helping him at all. He was simply carrying out the task that he was given in Yecheng. And besides, even if he was a monster and a traitor, he had no choice but to refuse. The girl noted that the young man seemed to know about Yukai's dirty deeds and suggested that he join forces with her and deal with Yukai together, introducing herself as Jang Yuan, from the reconnaissance squad of the 2nd Supply Department of the 8th Defensive Line. And despite all her expectations, Zeing immediately replied that he was refusing her offer. Afterwards, Yuan asked him if he had really decided to act in concert with Yukai. But Zeing replied that this was not the case. He just wanted to deal with Yukai personally, but not now, and moreover, not with her. The young man noted that Yuan probably didn't think about the consequences, because if she wanted to get rid of Yukai, she had two options: either an assassination attempt or a denunciation. However, if she kills him, how can she be sure that she will not be turned in? And if the assassination attempt is completely unsuccessful, is she ready to bear the consequences? Moreover, if they do try to expose Yutsai now, the investigation will obviously be delayed due to the war, and humanity is just now suffering another serious defeat. In simple terms, attempts to report Yutsai could be seen as internal disunity, thereby triggering a chain reaction that would lead to chaos throughout the rear. However, Yuan didn't like Zeing's plan to deal with Yukai alone, as she believed that he wouldn't be able to handle it himself, as he was just a deserter. Zeing interpreted her words as an attempt to measure strength, so he said that he would not mind finding out right now which of them was more suitable for the role of Yukai's killer. This made Yuan wary, and the aura emanating from Zeing couldn't help but be frightening. The young man also said that if she had offered to fight him a week ago, he would have probably refused, and this gave the girl some thoughts. Meanwhile, Zeing said that it seemed like they had already said everything they wanted to each other, so he would deal with Yukai alone from now on. Yuan decided to back down and trust Zeing, reminding him that he had no room for error. However, Zeing had something he wanted to ask Yuan for. He needed help in obtaining new mutant beasts. Yuan asked him how many more monsters he needed, because with his current strength, he definitely couldn't be called a weakling even on a real battlefield. And besides, he was constantly pumping up his strength, but he was hiding, which made her wary. But Zeing assured her that she had nothing to worry about, because no matter what, he was fighting on the side of the people, but he still lacked the strength to save humanity. Yuan thought Zeing was quite suspicious, but despite this, she trusted him. A couple of days later, Zeing again completed the task brilliantly and raised his authority in the eyes of others even more. Yukai decided to immediately assign him a new task, but this time it would be level 5 monsters. Meanwhile, Liu asked him if he was afraid of fighting level 5 monsters, since he was all wounded after fighting level 4 creatures. But the young man assured her that everything would be fine. The young man's confidence also pleasantly surprised Yukai, because Zeing was not only smarter than his previous officer, but also charged less for his work. In addition, the fighting on the front lines became more difficult, and supply orders increased several times, and this only played into Yutsai's hands. Yutsai told the young man that he had great hopes for him, and if he needed anything, he could always contact him, and if he completed a couple more such tasks, he would personally present him and his training ground with medals. But Zeing decided not to answer Yukai, and instead ordered Liu and the others to continue working. Yukai was also pleasantly surprised by the working atmosphere at the site, and this gave him confidence. However, he had no idea that his so-called talisman would actually turn out to be a knife stuck in his back. After some time, Zeing went out to exterminate monsters, and this time he decided to use his new skill, Blade of Evil. He cut down the monsters one after another, and the source stones needed to level up Asura fell like millions. On March 20th, fierce battles took place on the 8th line of defense of the country of Orloff. Approximately 800,000 soldiers were lost, and another 50,000 soldiers with superpowers, and all this in 4 hours. On March 22nd, the 8th defensive line of the northern glacier cracked, and 10 alien races broke through. 60 warships fell in the battle. On March 24th, the 8th defensive line of the southern glacier was attacked by a race of mutant steel wolves, and in just an hour, 50 native fighters were killed. On March 26th, the 8th line of defense in France and the 8th line of defense in Kawasaki fell in just half an hour. Meanwhile, Zeing was able to reach the maximum level of the Asura talent tree. Now the young man could transform into a ferocious demon and destroy monsters even faster and in greater numbers, and what's more, finally confront Yutsai. The power that Zeing had acquired was truly devastating. The difference in strength between the maximum level and the previous levels was simply colossal. Meanwhile, the global situation was deteriorating daily. At the moment, only the Eastern Union, the United States, and Russia remain on the 8th line of defense and are stubbornly defending themselves, while the Eastern Union has once again declared mobilization, lowering the draft age to 16. Zeing didn't expect that humanity would begin to move towards defeat so quickly, and despite his Asura talent, that alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to come up with a new plan to become even stronger. Meanwhile, he finally decided to deal with Yutsai and asked him to help drive away the steel wolves from the southern glacier. Yutsai decided not to refuse him, offering his assistance as a reward for the young man's efforts. However, Zeing did not want Yukai to suspect him of anything, so he decided to pretend to be his subject until the very end, after which they went to the southern glacier. Meanwhile, Zeing remembered his past life, and according to his guess, with the awakening of superpowers in people, a plan of all races to eliminate them would soon be launched. This, in turn, meant that the young man now needed to act more carefully, and in the meantime, his beast tamer level had reached 7th, and in addition, he had managed to tame 1,000 mutant steel wolves. Meanwhile, Yukai and the rest of his team went to the southern glacier, as Zeing had previously asked him to do. Yukai wasn't worried about anything, because despite the fact that the place was swarming with wolves, he wanted to quickly finish them off by teleporting to the nano chamber, but suddenly his plan failed. There were too many monsters and they all surrounded Yukai's cars. He began to panic and ordered to immediately teleport him to a safe place. But teleportation is only possible over a distance of 1 kilometer, and the wolves stretched for dozens. Therefore, the only way out for Yukai was to drive forward without stopping. And by that time, Zeing, who had planned all of this, had already approached them. The young man then activated the taming talent and managed to tame over 100,000 wolves, after which the monsters suddenly stopped, and Yukai thought that there was a tamer ahead who helped them. But he had no idea that this tamer was actually Zeing, and that he didn't want to save them, but on the contrary, tear them to shreds. After this, the wolves moved in a pack towards Yutsai's convoy. Fearing nothing, they began to attack them. The situation was critical, and the only thing Yutsai's soldier could do at that moment was to try to send them to a safe place. But there was one problem. The nano camera did not work at such a long distance, so they were teleported to the fortress of the ancient city. However, as soon as they teleported, Zeing was already waiting for them at that place. Yukai was confused. Did the young man really want to try to kill him? He declared that if Zeing laid a finger on him, he and his family would die in terrible agony. But Zeing assured him that he would not give him such a chance. At that very moment, Yukai's soldier wanted to teleport him back and save him. However, he was unsuccessful, as Zeing then took the form of Asura and was able to repel the power of the soldier Yukai. He then finished him off without any difficulty, killing him with just one powerful blow, after which he threw Yutsai into the abyss of the canyon, and he only shouted at the end that the young man was a traitor and a deserter. And so that Yukai could not miraculously survive and his body could not be found, Zeing sent a couple of mutant wolves after him. The energy emanating from Yecheng was so powerful that even the Bureau for Research on People with Supernormal Abilities noticed it. In particular, the 5th-level Asura superhuman, Su Leng, became interested in this and wanted to report this anomaly to the Research Bureau. Meanwhile, Zeing was thinking about what to do with the 100,000 mutant wolves, and after some time, he decided to give them the order to bring him the source stones from the north of the Gobi Desert. Zeing looked like the leader of a pack of mutant wolves, and yet he was glad that he had such an army. Upon returning to the Yecheng training ground, Yuan approached Zeing and told him that Yukai and his team had encountered a pack of mutant wolves in the northern wasteland yesterday, and none of them had survived. Yuan asked the young man if this was all his doing, and if so, how did he manage to do it? Zeing merely replied that he had simply asked them to deliver him a couple of mutant wolves. Yuan was even more surprised to learn that the young man could control the monsters. But Zeing preferred to keep it a secret and asked Yuan not to tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Yuan also said that she had already handed over all the evidence of Yukai's fraud this morning, and that his property would most likely be confiscated soon. Yuan offered to buy Zeing a drink as thanks for eliminating Yukai, but the young man replied that he was not in the mood for drinking yet. However, instead, Zeing wanted to ask her for something else that she could use to thank him. Zeing wanted to make the training ground the largest slaughterhouse in Yecheng, one that would accommodate hundreds of times more monsters than other training grounds, and Yuan replied that she could help him with this. The next day, Zeing, without wasting a single minute, set out to exterminate monsters in his new slaughterhouse. By killing a bunch of monsters, he earned a lot of primogems, which were necessary for leveling up, and in addition, very soon he will be able to acquire a million-strong army of steel wolves. Over time, Zeing raised his Beast Tamir level to 8th, his Taming level to 6th, and he also managed to obtain nearly 2 million origin stones. By traveling to the northern Gobi Desert, Zeing was able to significantly increase his strength, raising his skills and stats, and now his army of mutant wolves consists of 500,000 individuals. After that, he went to the Begu Valley where the 6th-level fire yaks lived. The young man also wanted to tame them, to make them valuable soldiers for his beast army. Taking control of them, he ordered them to guard the Begu Valley, bring him source stones, not eat people, and not terrorize cities. Afterwards, Zeing went to the Canyon Ravine, and he wanted to spend the remaining million source stones on a batch of level 7 mutants from the ravine. The 7th-level monsters were superior to the fire yaks and steel wolves, and although the difference in level was not too great, they were significantly faster and had a stronger aura. Zeing thought that he could easily tame them, just like he had with the previous monsters. However, at some point everything went wrong, and he was unable to tame the new animals the first time. However, this was not a problem for Zeing, as he was not averse to fighting using the skill Asura, Berserker. But as soon as he dealt with the army of monkeys, the Monkey King, who was at least level 9th, immediately emerged from the lair. Despite its size, it was quite fast and much stronger than the previous monsters. Although Zeing had become much stronger, the 9th-level monster still made him sweat quite a bit. In addition, the Monkey King considered him weak and did not want to obey. Zeing decided to stop standing on ceremony with him, and using Asura's Hell on Earth mode, show the monster the difference in their strength. At the same time, the Superhuman and Paranormal Research Bureau was monitoring the recent situation in Yecheng. Leng was sure that she saw a strange flow of powerful energy near Yecheng, so she continued to watch carefully. At that moment, Leng noticed strange vibrations in the southwest of Yecheng, in the area of the Canyon Gorge. She immediately told Zhao Keir, a 5th-level Asura ESP user, to prepare to track down the energy source. Keir immediately put her skills to use to keep track of what was happening in the canyon as quickly as possible, and what she saw shocked her. In front of her, she saw a real Asura demon, entering a stream of rage and mercilessly cutting down the Monkey King. The girl was not only extremely surprised by this, but also lost consciousness for a few seconds. Lan asked what she saw there, but due to extreme fear, Keir could not really explain anything, only said that she saw the Asura demon. Meanwhile, there was no living place left on the Monkey King. Zeing fought so fiercely that he completely forgot his main goal. In any case, in the end, the Monkey King still bowed his head and went over to Zeing's side. Meanwhile, he also gave an order to the monkeys, declaring that they now obey only the Monkey King and must remain in the Canyon Gorge, mining source stones for him. In addition, all they have to do is wait for further orders. And of course, they are forbidden to touch people and attack cities. Meanwhile, Lan and Keir discussed what had happened, and Lan told her partner that she had felt another flow of energy the previous night. However, Keir was unable to test this, as she could only use her ability once a day and only for 3 seconds. But Len said that wasn't what she meant at all, but that both of these energies could come from the same person. Keir asked her how this was possible, since they had been monitoring the Eastern Esper Alliance for many years, and the top 10 places in their ranking system had always remained a mystery, and no one knew their names until now. However, such wild and powerful energy of Asura led them to think that most likely it was one of these 10. After the incident, rumors and news began to spread that a mysterious man in a black cloak with deadly power had appeared in the Canyon Gorge and had taken 10th place in the Eastern Esper Alliance rankings. But no one could even imagine that this someone would turn out to be the well-known deserter and coward Zeing. Meanwhile, the US and Russian 8th lines of defense were completely destroyed, and in order to protect China, the Eastern Alliance launched a policy of full roll call of veterans for the 5th line of defense. Meanwhile, Zeing's father wrote to him asking him to come home for dinner, as he, his mother, and his sister missed him very much. However, it wasn't just his family that was waiting for him at home. Reporters had also come there, or more precisely, to his father, Nan Xiangshan, to take a short interview about the veterans' conscription. One of the Eastern Alliance reporters was Fang Shan, and the first thing she asked Xiangshan was what he was thinking when he signed his name right after he learned of the conscription. Xiangshan replied that he considered it his duty, and Shang then asked him what he thought of his son Zeing and his refusal to go to the front lines. It was a rather provocative question, and Xiangshan did not want to answer it. However, at this point the interview was interrupted by his wife and daughter, who had come home, and along with them, his well-known son. Xiangshan's wife, also Zeing's mother, Qing Shuimei, was a volunteer at the factory. They also had a daughter, Zeing's sister, Nan Zishan, who was a medical esper. Xiangshan also said that although Zeing did not go to the front lines, he worked hard at the training ground to ensure that the front lines had the necessary resources, so in his eyes, he will always be a good son. Shang decided to change the target's priority from Xiangshan to Zeing, sharply asking him if he had any comments regarding the fact that the 8th line of defense had fallen, and most likely his friends and classmates had died along with it. Xiangshan did not tolerate such accusations against his son and said that when he was called to sign the contract, they initially wanted to send him to the 6th line, but he volunteered to fight on the front lines, so her accusations were meaningless. Moreover, Zishan said that she was also ready to go to the front lines, having already volunteered as a medical worker for the 7th line of defense, and Suimei was also ready to go with her. Zeing also did not remain silent and declared that in this case, he would go with them to the front lines. This put some pressure on the young man, so he even decided to skip the family dinner, explaining that he needed to sort out some things. Xiangshan didn't question his son or try to persuade him to stay, as he was glad that they had at least seen each other. After this, Zeing went to the wild coastal forests, where he intended to tame war elephants. The elephants were much larger than the monkeys, wolves, and fire yaks, but no less strong. However, even so, Zeing did not have any particular difficulties in taming them, and the young man decided not to delay the matter. In a matter of minutes, Zeing was able to tame the war elephants and take control of them, making them part of his beast army. After some time, he gathered the remaining war elephants that lived in the forest. He ordered the monsters to remain in the wild coastal forests, to mine source stones for him, to await further orders and not to attack people or cities. As a result, the young man was able to raise the level of the beast tamer to 8, the level of the tamed beasts to 7, increase the number of tamed monsters to 3 million individuals, and managed to activate the formation tree. After this, Zeing went to the Yecheng training ground to obtain as many source stones as possible. He managed to obtain 100,000 stones, for which 10,000 formations became available to him, and the first thing the young man decided to try out was the sword energy formation. Soon, a powerful energy began to accumulate around him, which seemed to strengthen him with each passing second. However, Zeing decided not to stop at the first-level sword energy formation and used 2,000 of them at once. The strength that Zeing now possessed became simply indescribably powerful, and battles with monsters became even easier for him. An hour had passed since he had discovered the formations. The number of formations had reached 10,000. The ability level had risen to the 2nd level, and the youth now had access to the formations of Strengthening, Evil Spirit, and Sword Energy. Each formation required a base expenditure of 20 origin stones, but the main advantage was that their power accumulated infinitely, and 500,000 formations were required to level up. In the morning, Liu arrived at the site and noticed Wang and Zhang standing next to the open door, noting that Zeing had probably worked all night again. Wang said it was most likely because of the journalists, since it was because of them that he returned to the training ground immediately after dinner. The internet continued to vigorously discuss Zeing, calling him a spineless coward and saying that even his father had gone to the front, while he had decided to sit back in the rear. At this moment, Zeing came to Liu and the others to tell them something. He came to talk before he went to the front lines himself, but something unexpected happened. Zeing also received a letter from his father and was quite alarmed when he first opened it. Father wrote the letter in advance before he went to the front with his sister, and when Zeing received it, they were already there. In the letter, his father wrote to Zeing that he loved him like his own son, respected his every choice, appreciated his courage, even though he did not understand what the young man was planning, and also asked him to protect his mother, who remained in Yecheng. Reading his father's letter, Zeing could hardly contain his emotions to keep from crying, but it served as motivation for him to move forward. Meanwhile, the other participants of the testing ground were unhappy with Zeing's decision. They did not understand why the young man wanted to close the unfinished tasks of other testing grounds. But Zeing assured them that everything was fine, and also wanted to clarify the situation regarding the latest announcement about the emergence of a new fifth line of defense. The young man warned everyone that he would go there as the chief engineer. However, no one needs to worry about the operation of their landfill, as it will continue to function at full capacity. At this time, another army of soldiers was sent to the front lines to fight monsters. Zeing could have joined them too, but his father's words convinced him not to, because if the young man went to the front now, it would be absolutely useless. A new race of monsters, the Ascended, are non-carbon-based beings whose bodies cannot be used to extract energy sources, so Zeing would not have been able to gain a boost there. As these creatures summoned more and more of their kind, growing stronger with each passing second, even with Zeing's powers, humanity didn't have a chance now. Therefore, there was only one way out now: to focus on creating a fifth line of defense, which would become the final battlefield between humans and monsters. Meanwhile, a senior engineer named Li was already on the fifth defensive line. Li was confident that their new 10-meter-thick, 300-kilometer-long outer steel wall would hold off the monsters. But Zeing warned him that even such a structure would not be able to hold back the creature's attack. The real power that could wipe out monsters was formations, and creating them required a huge amount of source stones, which is what Zeing decided to do in the coming days. The young man went to the wasteland located between Yecheng and the fifth line of defense to try out new formations. Zeing opened a new fire formation that could summon 50,000 formations at once and strengthen them. The power of this formation was truly indescribable, but Zeing had yet to master it and refine it properly. Using his new power, Zeing mined the nearest 10 kilometers with fire formations to at least slightly slow down the advance of the low-level ascended ones. The young man decided that the formations would be ideal for mining Yecheng's 30-kilometer first defensive line to at least somehow hold back the monsters. The next day, Li asked Zeing to watch the news, where they were all talking about how the recently introduced fifth line of defense plan in Yecheng had proven useless on the battlefield. Public comments also left much to be desired, with many believing that the young man was wasting the country's money and resources. However, Zeing was not worried about this, and Li asked to continue working while he developed a new defense plan. However, Zeing already had his own plan. The recently erected steel wall was just a trap, after which the monsters would lose their vigilance and not notice the formations. In addition, Zeing thought of another way to use formations. Even though his elemental talents and forbidden spells tree had not yet awakened, he was already making a plan for the future. He asked Engineer Li to build 2 moats along the entire steel wall, one in front and one in the back, filling the front moat with water and the back moat with oil. So when the Ascended attack, the army will run electricity through the wall, the water will conduct the current, and those who break through the wall will find themselves in flames. Engineer Li was pleasantly surprised and hastened to report Zeing's plan to the entire city. In these few days, Zeing was able to accumulate 9 million origin stones thanks to the monsters he tamed and also reached level 4. However, even such a seemingly huge number of stones still remained insufficient. Meanwhile, as Zeing went further to strengthen the formations, he noticed a strange aura that resembled that of the Ascended ones. Besides this aura, Zeing also felt a strong human energy, as if an Esper was being attacked somewhere. At the same time, a rare event occurred in the Chu clan. One of the heirs was able to emerge from the hermitage ritual 2 years early, although he had previously stated that it would take him at least 12 years, which greatly surprised the patriarch Chu Chenghong. This genius turned out to be Chu Xingye, a 307th-generation Esper of the Chu clan, who explained his early return by sensing an incredibly powerful energy from the northwestern border. Chenghong was shocked, as the northwestern border was usually dead silent. Xingye stated that he wanted to go there personally to find out what exactly had happened. but Chang Hong tried to dissuade him, as the Ascended Ones resided there. However, Jing replied that as long as the war was going on, the whole world was one continuous danger. An hour later, Xingyi reached the border and was amazed to see the formation set up, not believing that this was the work of one person. As soon as he let his guard down for even a moment, one of the monsters immediately attacked him. It was an ascended monster nicknamed Steel Assassin, also known as Subject 3578. Besides the Steel Assassin, there was another ascended one there, the Rotten Giant, Object 1324. The two monsters had only one goal, to kill Qinghe at any cost, so they united. But Qinghe was no weakling either. Being a level 10 Esper and activating the territory control skill, he attacked them with a 1,000-sword energy technique. At this time, Zeing was surprised at how quickly events were unfolding in this reality, because in his past life, the most powerful Espers remained anonymous until the 12th year of the Great War, and their appearance then gave despairing humanity its last hope. In that life, the desperate struggle of the united people lasted for another 8 years, until humanity fell in the 20th year of the Great War. But this time, Zeing intended to prevent such an outcome and gather the strongest Espers to his side. Meanwhile, Xingyi continued his tough fight against two Ascended Ones at once. His strength and skill were barely enough to hold his own against such monsters. Xingyi did not want to accept such an outcome and was determined that if he was destined to die, he would at least take one of his enemies with him. However, at that moment, Zeing arrived and managed to pull the guy out of the bloody battle. Xinghe was surprised by Zeing's appearance and said that he could still fight, and Zeing replied that in that case, he would take on the Steel Assassin, and Xinghe should distract the Rotten Giant. The boys then rushed into battle, but they had to act in a coordinated and careful manner, since both Ascended Ones were high-ranking. However, Zeing did not feel any fear or uncertainty. On the contrary, he considered the monster a gift from fate, so that he could test his new formation on it. He activated the third-level formation Evil Thorns, but they were not enough. So he then activated 50,000 of these formations, as well as 50,000 ice ones. Xingyi was amazed by Zeing's strength and the power of his formations, noting that they were much stronger than those he had seen in the wasteland before. After this, Zeing was able to freeze the Steel Assassin and temporarily remove him from the battle. Now the main threat was the Rotten Giant, which was difficult for Xingyi to deal with. Zeing decided not to stand aside and help, using the skill Asura, Berserk, which made Xingyi even more surprised. Could the guy in front of him really be that mysterious Esper from the top 10? However, Zeing didn't want to kill the monster alone. He wanted to let Xingyi practice on him, because he had potential, but he had yet to fully realize it. Zeing wondered what would happen if he used the strengthening formation on a person, and without thinking twice, he used it on Xingyi. After using the tenfold enhancement formation, Xingyi lost consciousness for a while, and Zeing immediately received a warning from the system that the human body could only withstand a tenfold enhancement, and that exceeding it would result in death. Zeing thought that he would now have to fight alone, but at that moment something strange happened. A bright purple glow appeared in the sky. The source of this glow turned out to be Xinghe, who was able to awaken after being strengthened tenfold and immediately began to attack the monster. At that moment, the Steel Assassin also emerged from his icy confinement. Zeing decided not to hesitate and immediately used 4th-level lightning energy against him. Following this, a stream of powerful energy force rushed towards the monster, which was enough to finally finish it off. Besides the Steel Assassin, the Rotten Giant was also defeated, and thus Zeing and Xinghe were able to defeat the two ascended monsters. Afterwards, Xinghe expressed his gratitude to Zeing for saving his life and teaching him an invaluable lesson, declaring that the Chu clan would always serve him from now on and calling him master. At the same time, he asked him if he was hiding for the time being because, as is known, the main goal of all humanity is to defeat the Ascended Ones, and it was certainly not for nothing that he placed so many formations nearby. Xingyi also asked if his last name started with the letter N. Zeing was confused and didn't know what to say because he wanted to remain anonymous, but Xingyi pointed out that when you put his abnormal abilities and his online chatter together, it all added up. Xingyi knew so much about him that it began to frighten Zeing, but nevertheless he felt that he treated him with respect. Meanwhile, Xingyi declared that he wanted to go to the 7th line of defense on behalf of the entire Chu clan, firstly out of personal desire, and secondly to buy more time for Zeing and his plan. Zeing was pleasantly surprised by this meeting and replied that he would think about it, warning that the 7th line was much more dangerous than anywhere else, and he needed him alive, so he must definitely survive. But Jing replied that he himself understood this perfectly well, so he would definitely survive and protect everyone. Zeing thanked him for his understanding and asked him to take him to their clan, as he wanted to make a couple more enhancements for him before leaving. Meanwhile, Shingi told Zeing about his younger sister, noting that although she doesn't speak, she already has strong teleportation abilities. Meanwhile, the news was spreading that the Wu clan's young genius had risen to a new level and had managed to kill a level 10 ascended rotten giant, taking 9th place in the top espers. Meanwhile, Zeing met Shingi's younger sister, Tien, and was surprised because he didn't think she was so much younger than her brother. Despite her age, Tien was already ranked 12th in the ranking of the best espers, and her ability to teleport was truly extremely useful. Thanks to her ability, Zeing will be able to control every polygon, even while on the 5th line, and at this rate, he will no longer have to hide his 4th ability, Summon Undead. Afterwards, he met with Yuan, who was surprised by his words about being able to fight on the front lines and monitor 20 training grounds at the same time. Zeing asked her not to worry about it, but instead to make sure he got permission for all of this. Yuan noted that although this is madness, given the current situation at the front and in the rear, it will not be a problem. She also couldn't help but notice how much Zeing's strength had increased since their last meeting. And meanwhile, she wondered why he chose to hide in the rear instead of fighting on the front lines. Meanwhile, Zeing was happy about how quickly he could level up now, thanks to Tien's teleportation skill. After that, he went on to improve his skills and by that time had already managed to accumulate about 100 million source stones. Following this, Zeing and Tien moved to the Qin Imperial Tomb, which was located 100 kilometers away from the southern glacier. However, Tien was unable to move them to the desired location the first time, and Zeing realized that her ability, like everyone else's, also had a limit. However, after several more teleportations, they finally moved to Qin's tomb. Zeing wanted to tell her to move to a safe place, but Tien was much smarter than her brother and immediately hid. At this time, the young man used the ability Summon Undead and went to explore the tomb. However, the tomb exceeded all the young man's expectations. Suddenly, something strange began to happen, and a bright glow appeared everywhere. The emperor of the tomb himself, Yingzheng, who was on the 10th level, suddenly appeared in front of him. Zeing was struck by his aura, which even after hundreds of years remained truly stunning. That is what it means to be the greatest of emperors. However, the young man's goal was not to fight him, but to ask for help, explaining that their world would soon fall without support, and begged him to do him the honor of sharing his strength and army. However, Zheng considered his request impudent and immediately attacked, declaring that the young man would have to fight him and prove his strength. The emperor was confident that Zeing would not be able to even land a blow, but he exceeded all his expectations. However, Zheng was not going to give in either and decided to show his true strength. He summoned the Great Dragon Slayer with his skill and directed it at the young man. Zeing did not remain in debt and used Asura's skill Demon Slayer, but it was not enough to stop the emperor's power. Then the young man activated Asura's skill, Hell on Earth, and this alone was able to hold back the onslaught, allowing him to destroy the Dragon Slayer. Zheng was so amazed by Zeing's power that he admitted defeat, noting that another such explosion would destroy the entire tomb. However, before handing over his army, he asked the young man to tell him everything, since he himself had been in ignorance for more than 100 years. After Zeing explained everything, Zheng gave him the Tiger Talisman, which could instantly summon the emperor's army. Zeing decided to immediately test the talisman to make sure it worked. After the talisman was activated, the emperor's vast army rose up, and now the Summon Undead ability numbered around 10 million warriors. In addition, the young man discovered the Tree of Forbidden Elemental Spells, but to improve it, Source Stones were required. At that moment, Zeing was overcome by a strange premonition, as if there were steel assassins nearby, and they had attacked 2 young espers at once in different places. Realizing that he could not cope alone, he turned to Zheng, and the emperor immediately summoned his 2 strongest subordinates, Wang Jian and Ming Tian, ordering them to destroy the invaders. Zeing asked Zheng to go with them to the east, while he himself was going to move to the west. At the same time, 20 kilometers east of the Qin Empire's tombs, in the wild wasteland, one of the young espers was fighting against a crowd of monsters. It was an esper from the Su clan, the Ghost Master Su Chang'e, who had a very peculiar character. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, he continued to fight back and resist. The battle was very difficult, and at times he even used monsters as cover. But the steel assassin didn't care who he hit, even if it was his ally. The battle soon changed. and it was no longer Chang'e fighting monsters, but monsters fighting each other. However, the Steel Assassin was much stronger than ordinary monsters, and it was no trouble for him to cut down any of them. Chang'e had almost resigned himself to defeat, but at that moment, Zheng appeared, declaring that he had come to save him. The battle immediately changed, and soon there was no trace left of the monsters. At the same time, 20 kilometers from the tombs of the Qin Empire, in the wild wasteland, two young espers were fighting, brother and sister Qin Sui and Qin Ying, both possessing plant-summoning magic and being the heirs of the Qin clan. They found themselves in a hopeless situation surrounded by monsters, and Ying asked Sui to run away while he held off the enemies. But Sui refused to leave her brother, and at that moment a crowd of steel assassins fell upon them. The monsters managed to injure Sui, which sent Ying into an indescribable rage, and his anger was combined with the desire to avenge his sister. He instantly forgot about fear and despair, guided only by anger and his own strength. At that moment, Zeing arrived, and with a powerful blow, he pushed back several monsters. Zeing immediately ordered Tien to teleport all the Ascended Ones a kilometer south, and at that moment, all the monsters disappeared. It was a really impressive entrance, and besides, Zeing had a small gift for Sui and Ying. Just as he had previously strengthened Xinghe and Tien, he now gave a tenfold boost to Sui and Ying. With their new powers, the two young espers found it much easier to fight the crowd of monsters, despite their numbers. Zeing himself also did not stand aside and helped the guys by using his new forbidden spell, Ball Lightning. Sui and Ying were amazed by Zeing's destructive power, and although he told them to take on half of the monsters themselves, it seemed like there would soon be nothing left for them. The young man himself was also surprised because he did not expect the forbidden spell to be so powerful. Zeing then began to destroy the steel assassins using another new spell. This time it was the forbidden spell Earth Elemental, amplified 50 times. Sui and Ying were doubly surprised to see another spell from Zeing, and couldn't believe that someone so strong was fighting by their side. After the battle, the boys thanked him on behalf of the entire Qin clan and expressed their gratitude for saving him. In addition, they declared that their lives now belonged to him, and they were always ready to carry out any of his orders. Zeing was surprised and asked if they really knew who he was since they were talking about orders, but the guys replied that they were seeing him for the first time. However, this was only a plus for Zeing, and he noted to himself that it would be better if it remained like this. By that time, the emperor and his subordinates had joined them, and along with them, Chang'e. Chang'e expressed his gratitude and appreciation for Zeing's help, noting that he was now indebted to him. Meanwhile, Zeing asked all the espers to send him to their clan residences so that he could use the collective enhancement. Chang'e was confused about what kind of enhancement he was talking about, and Zeing immediately enhanced it by answering his question. Ying stated that he was willing to do anything for Zeing, and this gave the young man the idea that perhaps it would be worth sending them all to the front lines. But he decided that it was too early and simply told them to be careful. At this time, Chang'e recovered from the effect of the enhancement and asked Zeing what he was planning since he was always acting secretly and wearing a mask. Furthermore, he summoned an entire army of undead to protect them and their homes, yet asked for nothing in return, making Chang'e wonder if they were really that useless to him. Or perhaps the young man simply wants to remain a mysterious hero in a dark cloak. Zeing replied that they now needed to head to the 7th line of defense, where their main task was to hold out for a few days, since the front lines were now much more dangerous than they seemed. Meanwhile, Zeing placed Shi Huang's 10 million-strong army of soldiers under the command of Chang'e. Meanwhile, news spread that the best Esper heirs from the Inner Su and Qin clans would lead their clans to the 7th line of defense. In addition, it became known that 3 young Espers died immediately after their appearance. Zeing noticed that life today was very different from before. Events were moving faster, and new Esper heirs were appearing much more quickly. Moreover, even if he rushed towards them at top speed, there was no certainty that he would be able to save everyone in time, so instead of putting out the fires, he decided to find and eliminate their source. So Zeing decided to go to the northern wasteland, because 5 great Espers were already on his side, which meant that humanity would soon be able to turn the tide of the war. Zeing and Tien traveled to the Han Dynasty tomb, where the young man intended to meet the ancestors of the Great Dynasty. Since he had already subjugated the Qin Dynasty, it was not difficult for him to subjugate the Han Dynasty as well. And now 10 million soldiers fought on his side, 20,000 of which he immediately sent to the northern wasteland. With such destructive power and reliable support, the young man decided to take action instead of sitting back. The next time Zeing activated Asura's skills, He was immediately noticed by the Paranormal Research and Supervision Center. Moreover, this time his energy was many times more powerful than before, and Lan immediately wanted to report this to the military. Meanwhile, Zeing, using his new powers, covered the entire nearby area with defensive formations against monsters. Lan was amazed that in addition to Asura's demonic energy, formation magic was also used here. And Kier wanted to make sure whether this was really the mysterious Esper from the top, but she had already used up all her energy. At this time, Zeing was already calling on the warriors of the Han Dynasty, ordering them to destroy all enemies. He even managed to subjugate the strongest warriors of the Han, Wei Qing, Emperor Wu, and Huo Qibing. From such a powerful energy, Len almost lost consciousness and could not believe her eyes. It was difficult for her to even evaluate such power on their 10-point scale, so she declared it to be divine level. Zeing continued to develop his strength and used the forbidden spell Ball Lightning, strengthening it 100-fold. From such power, it was as if a second sun appeared in the sky, blinding everyone so much that in an instant day turned to night. The light was so bright that all the residents of the nearby towns were stunned with amazement. This caused concern among the army, and soon some troops were sent into the northern wasteland for reconnaissance. The young man did not stop and summoned 500,000 steel wolves, fire yaks, and in addition 1,000,000 war elephants and giant monkeys. This sight left everyone completely baffled. And meanwhile, Su Xiaonan and Chen Lianyi, who had been saved by Zeing earlier, began to wonder if all of this had really been orchestrated by that very young man who could tame steel wolves. Yuan was of the same opinion and could not believe that such power belonged to Zeing alone. Zeing managed to arouse the interest of not only those who had met him before, but also complete strangers, such as the Esper Lan Changkong from the East Sea, home of the Lan clan. Besides Changkong, other clans also became interested in him. Zhuge, Xuan Yuan, Huang, Yu, and even Xiu. Zeing was delighted. He had managed not only to create a commotion to attract monsters, but also to gather many successor Espers that he could strengthen. Meanwhile, one of the Huang clan's Esper heirs, Huang Xuan, found himself in a difficult situation and was surrounded by ascended monsters. When he already thought that it was all over for him, a miracle suddenly happened. The monsters began to retreat. In fact, this was only the beginning of a battle within the great battle orchestrated by Zeing. After this, a fierce battle began between the ascended monsters and Zeing's army, on whose side the undead and beasts fought. The battle turned out to be truly brutal, with an incredible number of opponents participating on both sides. Zeing strengthened his beasts and undead, and as he expected, it gave a significant boost in strength. However, despite the strengthening, everyone except the king was still inferior in strength to the ascended ones. So Zeing gave the order to the monsters and undead to surround the enemies and create a ring around them. This was necessary to keep the battle in the center, preventing the monsters from breaking through further and minimizing human casualties. In addition, Zeing divided the enemies. He left steel assassins and trolls to fight the beasts, and the undead, who were immune to poison, fought poisonous monkeys and rotting cadavers. Meanwhile, Zeing managed to find the lair of the Ascended Ones and, using the enhanced spatial formation, caused an explosion. At that very moment, there was an explosion of incredible power, as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. After this, Zeing asked Tien to transfer him to those Ascended Ones who could break through the formations to the borders of the city. And the very next moment, without realizing it, he was standing in front of one of the Ascended monsters. He immediately used the forbidden spell Air Energy, strengthening it 50-fold, and wiped the monster off the face of the earth. Tien immediately transferred him to the other monsters that had managed to pass through the formations. Zeing, using the forbidden spell Earth Energy, amplified 500 times, dealt with several Ascended Ones in an instant. His power was noticed by the Esper heir of the Zhuge family, Zhuge Yuan, and he was shocked that someone had managed to bring the management of the land to such a high level. Zeing immediately approached him and cast a buff, and Yuan didn't even have time to understand anything at that moment. After coming to his senses, Yuan asked him to stay and state his name so that the Zhuge clan could thank him. But Zeing only said that he had left a message for him and the warriors in the northern lands of Gobi, so if he wanted to express his gratitude, he should just follow his orders. After that, Zeing disappeared, and Yuan was left with even more questions, and he understood only one thing. Since he disappeared immediately after strengthening, it means he does not want to reveal his identity. Meanwhile, military forces were getting closer and closer to the battlefield. The supreme commander of the internal forces was Zhu Chuyan, and he was confused when, having landed at the site, he found not a soul around. Later they found that all the monsters that were here before were buried. Meanwhile, Chuyan met Yuan and asked if he had actually managed to meet 5 divine-level superhumans at once, but he replied that he had only seen one, and even then he was wearing a mask. He also told Chuyan that the mysterious stranger disappeared immediately after he cast the buff on him and left some message on the stone. After this, Chuyan ordered all high-ranking officers and leaders of the ancient clans on the 5th line of defense to gather for an emergency meeting. Zeing decided not to reveal his identity for now, so as not to make new enemies, since this was the only way to secure the army's support. He knew that human nature was unpredictable, and in war there would always be traitors, and if he revealed his name now, all his efforts would be in vain, as had already happened in his past life. As long as everyone considers him a coward, it will be difficult for people and enemies to associate him with superhumans. So being a strategist in the shadows, playing the role of a coward, is the best disguise for him. Meanwhile, the news reported that Superman Yuan was leading the clan to the 7th line of defense to strengthen the defense. And at the same time, a meeting began in the military hall at the 5th line of defense. Chuyan clarified that they had gathered to discuss the message on the stone and asked the officers what they thought about it. The leader of the Zhuan Yuan clan, Ru Long, put forward his theory, suggesting that this was not just a message, but a grand strategy, and according to him, the 5 divine superhumans were going to hold the final battle right here, at the 5th line of defense. He explained that by volcanic source, he meant an artificial volcano, a deposit of crude oil that, when ignited, would incinerate everything in its path. And under the heavenly water, Lon suggested that there was a man-made channel hidden, through which they planned to direct water from the East Sea to the northwest. The forest of steel in turn implies an impenetrable jungle of metal, or perhaps the cultivation of enormous metal giant trees, and stones that burn the heavens most likely refer to the source stones, the reserves of which are sufficient to engulf the sky in tongues of flame. Fangling, the general of the 2nd line of defense, added that, judging by these clippings, there was a high probability that the message was left by Asura, and he, in turn, was unpredictable, so one should not rely on the word of one madman. Li Fei, the general of the 3rd line of defense, noted that Lin was right, so he asked them to refrain from mentioning Asura, since they still didn't know who these 5 divine superhumans were. The leader of the Zhug clan, Cheng Ming, also expressed his opinion, asking for a moment of attention. He noted that even if the message had indeed been left by Asura, the other 5 superhumans were undoubtedly present. Otherwise, they would not have been informed of it after the abilities of his clan members were enhanced. Moreover, given the requirements, everything points to great formations and powerful spells that would require the earth itself to fuel them. And, in addition, they decided not to reveal themselves. His words were also supported by Lon. Chuyan noted that since 5 divine superhumans had managed to destroy the 10th level steel assassins in less than an hour, they were worth trying to trust. After all, as sad as it may sound, they had no other choice. So Chuyan spoke out in favor of trying to implement this plan. Following this, the start of 4 grandiose projects was announced: an artificial volcano, a great canal, a jungle of steel, and a mountain of source stones. Meanwhile, Engineer Li happily informed Zeing that the new projects were similar to those they were already working on, noting that their plans seemed to be to the liking of the higher-ups. However, suddenly a red funnel appeared in the sky, coming directly from the 7th line of defense. It was one of the worst-case scenarios that Zeing was even afraid to imagine. The alien gates had opened, causing a rift in space, although according to calculations they should not have opened for another 2 years. The situation had become critical, and Zeing urgently needed to come up with something to protect the people on the front lines. First, he summoned 20 million great warriors of the Han Dynasty and ordered them to head to the 7th line of defense, and in addition, he sent 3 million beasts. However, they all still had to be transported to the battlefield, and this required an indescribable amount of strength from Tien. Since they were thousands of kilometers away from the 7th line of defense, it was incredibly difficult for Tien to teleport them there so quickly. However, despite Zeing's pleas not to do it if it was hard for her, the girl was determined to endure them at any cost. Meanwhile, on the battlefield of the 7th line of defense, preparations for the upcoming clash with the monsters were in full swing. The commander of the 7th line of defense was Wang Zai. He ordered the superhumans to lead the attack, with the espers to follow and the infantry to finish off the stragglers, while the artillery would provide fire support. One of the soldiers named Lao Zhang, pointed out that nuclear weapons and artillery shells were not enough for such a battle. So what was the point of fighting? But Xiangshan objected that this was not true. After all, if you recall the previous battle, when they were already on the verge of defeat, these young men came with their clans and even brought 10 million immortal souls, thanks to which they managed to achieve victory. Therefore, Xiangshan assured Zhan that, despite the slightly different situation, there was still a chance of victory, and they would find a way out even from this situation. Jan noted that although superhumans are strong, they are also made of flesh and blood. They get tired, bleed, and die. And looking at how young they all are, he is overcome with even greater anxiety. However, no one had time to be sad, because right now the lives of thousands of people depended on them. It was a fierce battle in which everyone fought with all their strength and all their potential. No one wanted to lose, so everyone rushed with all their might into the heart of the battlefield to crush the monsters. Even those who seemed to have no special fighting skills continued to fight, trying to somehow help their comrades. And those who did not possess superpowers found their strength in artillery and firearms. However, any terrible situation always has a sequel, even more complex and terrifying. And this is what happened this time, when a huge alien the size of a city wall entered the battlefield. But despite the fact that a truly terrifying and powerful monster appeared before the warriors, no one retreated. Even though his strength was monstrous, even though he inspired terror with just one glance, he did not become an obstacle on humanity's path to victory. In addition, the undead fought on the side of the people and they entered into battle with the monsters with no less enthusiasm. The undead had one peculiarity. They were immortal and could be reborn infinitely, but they could be destroyed if killed several times in a row within 1 minute. Even though the giant alien had killed several hundred undead, no one stopped. On the contrary, the attacks became even more ferocious. The undead's resilience became an example to the others, and Zai ordered the fighters to keep up and continue attacking the alien. Meanwhile, Zeing and Tien were already 200 kilometers from the 7th line of defense. Tien's strength was running out, but the girl did not give up, continuing to fight until the end, because she knew that right now her brother was fighting on the battlefield, and he needed her help. At the same time, the others continued to attack the giant alien, not allowing it to get closer to the city wall. Everyone understood that they couldn't cope with such a monster alone, so they had to act together. And even those who seemed to lack strong skills and power still continued to fight tirelessly. However, even our combined forces were still not enough to resist such a powerful monster. Moreover, the situation changed dramatically, and everything became much worse as the monster became even more aggressive. It was as if he had awakened all of his inner rage, accumulated over all this time, and was ready to spill it out right now. At the same time, a helicopter carrying Xiangshan took off into the sky, and he ordered everyone to retreat immediately. 3 minutes earlier, Xiangshan had asked Zhang to take control of the artillery and provide fire support, to which Zhang asked in surprise where he was going. Xiangshan noted that this alien was no ordinary enemy, and that they had a small ship with a nuclear mini-bomb in their arsenal, so if necessary, he would be ready to sacrifice himself. Jan didn't try to stop Xiangshan, and he went straight into the alien's mouth to feed it a nuclear mini-bomb. Xiangshan was willing to give his life in exchange for a chance that the others could survive and defend the line of defense. But at that moment, someone grabbed the helicopter with the forbidden spell wood element and ordered it to be taken back. That someone turned out to be none other than Zeing, who arrived just as his father was about to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. His appearance caused surprise, and with it, hope for victory in the battle with the giant alien. Meanwhile, Zeing handed over Xinghe, ordering her to be taken care of immediately, and also ordered all satellite communication devices to be turned off. No one yet understood who Zeing was, or why he wanted the satellites turned off, but they obeyed anyway, which caused a violent reaction in the command center, where they did not understand why the connection had been lost. Chuyan was alarmed because the giant alien had just caused a tornado, and the superhumans could be in mortal danger, and he didn't want to believe that the 7th line of defense had fallen so quickly. Meanwhile, Zeing was already fighting the alien, and while an entire army couldn't hold him back, the youth seemed to be able to kill him single-handedly. Zeing entered the Asura state and recognized the giant alien. It was an A-rank titan with a xenoblade. Zai was confused. Could it really be that mysterious Asura that everyone was talking about was in front of him now? But he couldn't believe it, assuming that the young man was probably just using forbidden spells. At the same time, the alien became even more enraged and repelled the attacks of hundreds of thousands of undead with just one roar. However, the undead army still did not retreat and continued to fight to the last using all its resources and strength. At this time, Zeing ordered the soldiers and superhumans to retreat immediately, declaring that he and the undead would be able to defeat this wave of monsters. After this, the young man rushed into battle against the alien, as if in front of him was not an A-rank titan, but some kind of steel wolf. Using Asura's skill, Demon Slayer, and Hell on Earth, Zeing was able to knock the monster to the ground and cut it into several pieces. However, this was not the end. The Blade Titan transformed into an even more terrifying form. He gained his ultimate form and became like a walking 10 blades. But for Zeing, this was even a plus, because the monster finally showed its ultimate form, which meant it became easier to find its weak point. Typically, this form might be the strongest, but all the energy in it is concentrated in the center, which is why the monster cannot move freely. And this played into Zeing's hands. Using the Demon Blade, Zeing instantly cut through the monster's defense and prevented it from escaping with his tornado, managing to locate its weak point. Zeing immediately used the forbidden spell Wood Element and completely killed the alien. Then he delivered the final blow, followed by a powerful explosion. After killing the Titan, Zeing fortified the surrounding lands from monsters using spikes and sword energy formations. He also cast the forbidden spell Earth Element and summoned an ancient being from the primordial chaos between heaven and earth. Following this, he activated 3 million reinforced formations within a 300-kilometer radius, which became a signal for the undead to rush into battle against the monsters. During this time, Zeing's Formation Master level had reached level 5, and to advance to the next level, he needed to set up another 50 million formations. The young man wanted to do it right away, but as soon as he tried to activate the 3 million giant monster extermination formations, the system returned an error due to a lack of origin stones. However, Zeing did not retreat, deciding to save his resources for now, but continued the fight. The young man only had 6 million origin stones left, and he planned to use them to set up formations around the entire perimeter of the city wall, strengthening them 50-fold. Meanwhile, Zai understood why the young man had ordered the satellite communication to be shut down. A deity whose body contained 5 abilities was beyond comprehension, and many would consider it an anomaly, not to mention aliens. Chang noted that it was quite ironic. People are so strange. As soon as something happens, they hope for a god to save them. But as soon as he actually appears, they are overcome with fear and a desire to destroy him. The other guys noted that Zeing didn't waste time not only because the situation was urgent, but also because he trusted them more than the people in the interior. In addition, Zeing said to leave the battle to him, and there were only 3 hours left until dawn, and the guys decided to use this time to recover, to rest, and be ready to fight. Meanwhile, Zing, despite having no origin stones left, decided to use his inner strength. The young man didn't even need to use formations to defeat the monsters. Asura's power alone was enough. Xiangshan noted that he was proud of his son, and Jan, who was standing next to him, was surprised, because despite the fact that he had saved them all, calling him son seemed strange. His reaction was quite normal, because few people knew that the young man who saved them was the same Zeing, the son of Xiangshan. Meanwhile, Tien's condition had stabilized and her life was no longer in danger. Xingye was glad that Tien had survived and would soon recover, but at the same time he blamed himself for his weakness, believing that because of this he could not fight alongside Zeing now. Zishan told him that there is a saying, "Clear minds often end their journey early." But realizing that she could not convince him otherwise, she added that he himself had the right to decide what to do. Finally, Zishan said that Zeing was probably grateful to him deep down. After some time, Tien finally woke up and, barely speaking, warned Xinghe that Zeing's abilities were using up origin stones, and since they had arrived in a hurry, he probably hadn't had time to stock up on them. Xinghe understood what Tien was hinting at, and immediately went to help Zeing. At this time, Zeing continued to fight the monsters, not retreating a single step, although more than 2 days had passed since the beginning of the battle. At that moment, Xinghe came to him and told him that Tien had already woken up, and also said that there was nothing more needed here, so it would be better for him to return to where the future of humanity would be decided. He assured him that they would buy him as much time as they could and try to survive to meet again. Meanwhile, he conveyed the words of Zeing's father, who said that after the war they would definitely meet and he would prepare his signature dishes. Zishan also asked him to convey a short message expressing her respect, which slightly surprised Zeing. After this, Zeing went to the testing ground again to collect more source stones. However, he urgently needed to come up with a way to hold back the next wave of monsters, because all the undead were on the front lines, and their ranks needed to be replenished. In addition, Zeing needed to complete the organization of the fifth line of defense, since the sixth was already of almost no value. At the same time, people were discussing various anomalous phenomena, such as the mutation of plants in the northwest, because with each opened portal, the spiritual energy of the earth grew, and as the alien invasion intensified, the earth itself began to awaken. Meanwhile, Zeing went to the Meteor Valley to tame a flock of giant mutated level 7 eagles there. These eagles could significantly strengthen his army of beasts, help in battles with monsters, and be useful for other purposes. Moreover, these animals were distinguished by high aggression and confidence in attack. In addition, they had strong defenses, and sometimes even some espers could not cope with them. Therefore, such a monster was an excellent boost for Zeing's army of beasts, and it would have been foolish not to take advantage of this opportunity, especially since taming them turned out to be quite easy for the young man. He then gave the eagles orders not to attack cities, not to harm people, to guard the meteorite valley, and to collect the source stones while awaiting his further instructions. Thus, Zeing was able to increase his taming level to 8th, the maximum, which made him incredibly happy. In the meantime, he also rescued a young level 5 esper named Huang Jia, and those who were with him fled as soon as they saw the eagles. Jia said that they were from the Huang clan of the Inner Territories, subordinate to the Superman Huang Xiao, and they were sent to the northeastern border to explore and capture the spiritual mountains. Zeing was surprised that someone would decide to take over the mountains, but Jia explained that the spiritual energy in several high mountains on the northwestern border had increased dramatically, and many people had flocked there to cultivate. Zeing noted that such a sudden surge of energy was most likely caused by the Void Gate, the spatial rift that the Xenos had opened, and so he wanted to summon another wave of undead, using the mountains to activate the resonance throughout the northwest. Meanwhile, he told Jia to return to the clan and report that he had an excellent idea on how to use all the spiritual mountains of the northwest, and also to warn that occupying the mountains was prohibited, and if anyone tried to disobey regardless of clan, Zeing himself would convince them to change their mind, and at that moment he heard a strange sound coming from the depths of the mountains. Following the sound, he spotted a mutated poisonous lizard and couldn't pass up the chance to tame it. Since the Xenos have their rotting behemoths, Zeing will now have poisonous lizards. Immediately after taming them, he gave the lizards the same orders. Do not attack cities, do not harm people, guard the meteorite valley and collect source stones while awaiting his further orders. After this, Zeing went to the tomb of the Tang Dynasty, an empire that shook the world, before which all nations bowed, and whose army was considered invincible. The young man managed to summon the emperors and generals of the Tang Dynasty, among whom were Lin Yuan, the founder of the dynasty, Li Shimin, the ruler of the Zhenguan era, and Empress Wu Zetian. As a result, another 30 million Tang Dynasty soldiers joined Zeing's undead army. Meanwhile, Zeing asked the emperors to take command of the army and divide their troops among the 3 great mountain ranges of the northwestern border, while he himself would wait for them at Mount Tangmodao, where these ranges converge. He also warned them that if anyone stood in their way, they should first try to negotiate, but always be ready to fight. Meanwhile, Jia reported to Xiao that someone was trying to take over the mountains and was outraged that someone dared to go against him. Jia explained that this was no ordinary person, but the very same divine-level beast tamer. But Xiao didn't care, because he considered himself stronger, since he was a 10th-level superhuman, chosen by heaven itself. After that, at night, Xiao and the others set out to capture Mount Tangmodao. He stated that since the other clans had recognized him as the owner of this mountain, no one had the right to even try to take it away from him, even if it was a divine-level tamer. At this moment, Zeing, hearing his loud statements, appeared in front of him, causing great surprise. Zeing noted that if Xiao was truly willing to kill anyone who dared to go against him, then that was exactly what he was here for. However, despite Zeing's threatening words, Xiao was not worried about anything, because he was confident that he was many times stronger than him. However, his self-confidence and stubbornness ultimately proved his undoing. Xiao thought that Zeing was just a beast tamer and that it would be easy for him to deal with him. But he was shocked when the youth attacked him first with a lightning blade. Unlike Zeing, Xiao did not respect his subordinates and was willing to use them as human shields. According to Xiao, servants are just pawns, ordinary victims who are only required to protect their master. Following this, Xiao decided to demonstrate his strength to Zeing and prove that he was strong not only in words. Zeing also had no intention of giving in, but he did not use his sword to avoid being accused of murder. When Xiao used Jia as a human shield, Zeing lost his temper and his anger filled everything around him. The young man used the forbidden spell Lightning Element, activated a twofold overload, and sent a powerful stream of power straight at Xiao. As a result, it turned out that Xiao was strong only in words, but in reality, his strength was no greater than even a low-ranking monster. At that moment, Huang Jutian, the patriarch of the Huang family, came to them, but he did not act aggressively even after seeing what had happened, but calmly asked what had happened. Although other family members insisted that such an enemy should be eliminated immediately, Jutian noted that it was worth listening to him first. Zeing was glad that, unlike Xiao, Jutian was reasonable, and explained to him that he was one of the divine-level superhumans of the Northwest and possessed forbidden spells. He also said that for the sake of the future of humanity, all the spiritual mountains of the Northwest must be handed over to him, as they cannot be privately owned. Zeing added that he had warned Xiao about this in advance, but Xiao had attacked him with his fists, angering the Huang family members. However, Jutian held a different opinion and stated that Xiao's actions were indeed wrong, and that the reason for this was that he was given too much leeway. Jutian explained that by acting so recklessly, Xiao was endangering both humanity and the family's reputation. The patriarch apologized to Zeing, admitted his mistake, and agreed to hand over the mountains if necessary. Zeing was pleased with how easily Jutian had come to his aid, and with his fair decision. At this time, one of the undead armies occupied the Dragon Mountain and declared that under the conditions of the Great Era, this mountain could not belong to private individuals, demanding that the remaining clans immediately leave it. The same thing happened on Mount Hua, where they also warned that anyone who disobeyed would face inevitable reprisals. At the same time, on Mount Kunlun, the emperors of the armies admired the wisdom of their descendants and placed great hopes on them. At this moment, Zeing climbed to the top of Mount Tang Modao to conduct the 6th-level Immortal Soul Fusion. After this, the song of Wang Qin's triumphal march was heard, which could be heard for several hundred kilometers around. This march reached both the hospital and the reserve line of defense, including the training ground, filling everyone with a strength similar to Zeing's strengthening. The news reported that, according to preliminary data, 8 million residents of the northwestern border manifested the ability of 4th-level Immortal Soul Exterminators last night. Furthermore, due to the fact that the people of the northeast also gained abilities, the ancient sunken forests turned into a steel jungle, where scouts espers of the wood element have already gone, having previously designated this zone as extremely dangerous. Tien thought that it was Zeing who caused the mutation of the ancient forests, but it turned out that this was not the case. And since the changes in the forest were serious, the young man decided that they would go there first. At the same time, at dawn, a strange phenomenon occurred in the ancient forests, similar to a tide of monsters, and it seemed that they were preparing to attack the city. Li, a wood elementalist, went there with the other guys to scout out the monsters and wanted to find out their tactics and combat power before retreating. However, as a result, the monsters surrounded them, and Li noticed that the trees were not only conscious, but their movements were coordinated. Realizing the dangerous situation they were in, Li ordered everyone to get ready, but they were unable to attack or even hold back the trees, and Li already thought that their lives would end there, and they would not even have time to warn the city. Suddenly, the trees' behavior changed. Their blue eyes turned red, and they abruptly stopped attacking. This was explained simply. Zeing managed to arrive just at the moment when the trees became active, and, having tamed them, ordered them not to attack cities and not to harm people. He also told them that their main task would be to protect the ancient forest, collect the source stones, and await further instructions. Meanwhile, Zeing discovered a new skill, King's Aura, which allowed him to subjugate and tame beasts using the ancient aura of the Beast King. He also mastered the skill Ancient Awakening, which allows him to summon the progenitor when a 100 million monster tide appears to enhance his combat power, in addition to the forbidden spell, Earthstorm. Zeing was surprised at how quickly he had managed to unlock several new useful skills. And in the meantime, he wanted to use the Origin Stones to complete the formations on the 5th reserve line of defense, but he no longer had the strength left. As a result, he lost consciousness, and Tien immediately carried him to the training ground dormitory, and the young man woke up only several days later. Zeing began to blame himself for this, but Tien noted that he had already done everything possible, because while he was between the front lines, summoning immortal souls and taming all the beasts, he never closed his eyes. Meanwhile, Tien also wanted to help him, But she had nothing but the ability to teleport, and this greatly upset her. But Zeing said that everything was fine, because they were not fighting alone against the monsters. After that, Zeing went to the 5th line of defense at night, activating 10 million blazing fire formations and elemental sword formations there, stretching them out for 200 kilometers. To do this, he stocked up in advance on source stones, which he obtained at the testing ground, in the Meteorite Valley, and in the ancient forest. This time, the young man was confident that this amount of resources would be enough to provide reliable protection. He also activated 20 million freezing formations and earth spikes, stretching them out for 300 kilometers, and an additional 30 million lightning strikes for another 300 kilometers. As a result, the formation wall was almost complete, and his formation master level had reached 7, and for the next one, he needed to place 70 million formations. At the same time, the news reported that after the mass awakening, infrastructure development in the northwest had accelerated, and the Great 1,000-kilometer Canal project had been fully completed. However, not everyone considered this a good sign. Some saw it as ordinary corruption, such as the heir of the Zhao family, as well as Qian Bing and Sun Li, who wanted to organize a live broadcast to expose the 3 main projects. At this time, Zeing continued to place formations, strengthening the defense against the impending attack of the monsters. The young man had grown considerably stronger since arriving at the training ground, and it seemed that he was now capable of fighting an entire army of aliens on his own. Meanwhile, he used the forbidden 5th-level water spell, Water Dragon's Charge, and summoned a powerful monster into this world. However, he did not summon him just like that, but to test what combinations of techniques were capable of. He ordered the dragon to attack him, while he himself activated Asura's defense. As a result, the forbidden water spell alone was enough to push back Asura's defense, and Zeing realized that if he combined them and strengthened them with the power of the Great Channel, it would be possible to turn the tide of the battle. In this way, he also raised the level of Elemental Caster to the 6th level, and to advance to the next level, he needed to use 6,000 forbidden spells. At the same time, 3 young guys went live, promising to destroy 3 main projects, and the first thing they took on was the Great Channel. The audience enthusiastically supported them, calling them the long-awaited heroes and those who would finally challenge corruption. They all used their powers at once to destroy the Great Canal, but it proved extremely difficult. The spectators were delighted with the boys' performance and supported them with all their might. At this time, Zeing and Tien were on Mount Tang Modao, and as she expected, thanks to the power of the spiritual mountain, the power of the immortal souls was growing stronger. Tien, meanwhile, asked him whether the abilities of the city's residents, who had recently awakened, would also be strengthened, and Zeing replied that this was exactly the case. At that moment, Zeing noticed something strange in the sky, and a familiar feeling came over him, as if an A-rank Xenos was about to appear. The young man wondered if the foreigners had actually found out about his plan, and decided not to hesitate, immediately activating the water dragon's attack. The dragon immediately attacked the 3 youths, whom Zeing mistook for foreigners. Fortunately, he didn't kill them with the first blow, but only threw them onto dry land. However, the dragon had no intention of stopping, and his gaze showed clear killing intent. At this moment, Zeing appeared, and was surprised to realize that there were only 3 young men in front of him. Meanwhile, Zeing asked them who they were and what they were doing here. The guys answered that they were superhumans of the 3 great families. The guys admitted why they came and tried to justify themselves, saying that when they saw Zeing there, they realized everything. Zeing did not lecture them, but instead demanded that they take him to their clans and added that if they did not want to be exterminated, they had better hurry. This greatly surprised and at the same time frightened the boys, because the guy in front of them turned out to be so strong that he was not afraid to face their families. Meanwhile, Mount Heavenly Peak, where the Jang family was located, was attacked by A-rank Xenos, the very thing Zeing feared most. Meanwhile, he told the Jang family members that now was not the time for tears, and if they wanted revenge, they should follow him. Afterwards, they went to the Tien family's estate on the Phoenix Mountain Range, and it was also attacked by monsters. Zeing then headed to the Sun family's estate in Jade Pass, which was attacked by the A-rank Xenos, the Blazing Sky Eagle. However, this time, he was unable to escape from Zeing because the young man finally caught up with him. Zeing attacked the monster using the skill Asura's Rapid Slaughter and instantly broke through its defense. He then activated Berserker mode and dealt several more powerful blows to his opponent. Despite the damage, the eagle continued to hold on and was even able to counterattack. However, Tien saved Zeing from such sudden attacks every time, using her teleportation ability. Meanwhile, the Xenos acknowledged the youth's strength and said that he was not worthy of even death, but only slavery. These words angered Zeing even more. Rage overwhelmed him, and using Asura's dragon-slashing skill, he decided to put an end to the monster once and for all. The eagle tried to resist Zeing's attack and was confident that he could repel it. As a result, he actually managed to parry the previous blow, but immediately after that, Zeing froze him and activated the skill Hell on Earth. He then empowered the very same youths who had previously tried to destroy one of his projects. The result of the battle was that Zeing killed the Xenos and showed a worthy example of his strength to others. He also asked them not to ask how to avenge their clans, but rather to go to the fifth line of defense and prepare for war. These events immediately made the news, where it was reported that 4 A-class Z assassins had infiltrated the inner territories, and the ancient clans of Zhao, Tien, Sun, Sen, and Wang had been wiped out. It was also mentioned that Asura helped people again by killing the Blazing Sky Eagle, and thus saving the heirs of the Yang, Bing, and Li clans. Meanwhile, Zing collected a few more source stones and went to the East Sea to tame the sea beasts. The vast ocean was home to the most powerful monsters, mutated swordfish and level 9 tiger sharks, as well as mutated level 10 great white sharks. Now 100 million sea beasts fought on Zeing's side and obeyed his orders. At the same time, Chang Kong, the East Sea Superman from the Land family, watched the sea beasts rampage with amazement. Chang Kong thought that one of the monsters had started a rebellion and was going to attack everyone, so he immediately sounded the alarm and ordered the clan to prepare for battle. The Land family had guarded the East Sea for generations, and Chang Kong couldn't allow the monsters to run amok. As he got closer, he was even more surprised. It turned out that it was not one animal, but a whole flock of different species that were supposed to be enemies. At this time, Zeing ordered the beasts not to attack cities and people, but instead to collect source stones and destroy alien invaders. Chang Kong noticed how the murderous aura suddenly disappeared. But at that moment, something strange appeared behind him. Before Chang Kong could comprehend the situation, he saw the sea beasts rushing to attack the enemies. The swordfish was focused on fighting the cyclops turtle at this time. Tiger sharks fought with a spiny snake, and the white sharks, being the highest ranking, fought with the ice dragon. However, it was not easy against the ice dragon. He froze all his opponents in an instant. At this time, the swordfish attacked the cyclops turtle, but its chances of success were slim. Zeing realized that sea beasts could easily deal with opponents below A rank, but were still powerless against A rank. The young man then activated a 50-fold boost at a distance of 700 nautical miles. At that moment, an ice dragon appeared behind Chang Kong, who was stunned by what was happening, and he barely had time to notice it. But Chang Kong did not feel fear, but on the contrary, was determined to defeat him and defend the honor of his family. However, the monster's power proved too great, and even Chang Kong's water dragon could not resist it. At that moment, the enhancement spread to Chang Kong, filling him with even more power. Chang Kong was pleasantly surprised. Although he did not fully understand how exactly he had become stronger, it made him even more determined and awakened confidence in victory. After this, Chang Kong's powers seemed to gain a completely different power, and he was able to wipe the ice dragon off the face of the earth in an instant. At the same time, the already strengthened sea animals were able to cope with the spiny snake, as well as the cyclops turtle. Zeing was glad that his fighting power had finally reached such a level, and in between, he asked Tien to bring Chang Kong to him. At this time, Chang Kong was screaming, trying to reach the animal tamer, expressing deep gratitude for his help and saving his life. At that moment, Tien suddenly appeared in front of him and immediately grabbed him, instantly moving him to Zeing. Zeing immediately asked him not to ask anything, but to simply listen carefully to what he had to say. He asked Chang Kong if he could destroy about 10,000 alien monsters, and he replied that he was ready to lay down his life without hesitation for the sake of peace. For this, Zeing rewarded him with a 10-fold boost and declared that Chang Kong was now the master of the East Sea, with 100 million sea beasts under his control. At that moment, Tien noticed something strange. The Void Gate began to expand, and the 7th line of defense might not be able to withstand it. Meanwhile, the A-rank aliens arrived at the 7th line of defense, and the order was given to abandon it. Xinghe noted that Zeing ordered a retreat because the 7th line was almost destroyed, the 6th had already been evacuated, and forces needed to be concentrated on the 5th. While the army retreated, the superhumans tried to buy it as much time as possible. At this time, the undead entered the battle, declaring that they would now take all the damage on themselves and that Xinghe and the others should also retreat. Meanwhile, a complete evacuation of the seventh line of defense was announced, where only the undead and beasts remained, and the sixth line held out to buy time for the fifth. In the fifth line of defense, about 300 million people participated in the battle, 80 million of whom possessed superpowers, and in the East China Sea, the Land family released the spirit and completed the four great projects. Meanwhile, Zeing prepared for the decisive battle and went to the Fiery Heavenstone facility, where he absorbed its source and power. He then headed to the Forest of Steel facility and cast the Forbidden Gold spell, forging the steel. After this, Zeing arrived at the Volcano Source facility and summoned the Lava Dragon, the ruler of mountains and seas there. At the same time, he raised the Star Control spell to the maximum level, at which even the Blue Star would not be able to resist it. However, Zeing wanted to use it during the decisive battle. He then went to places where it was still possible to tame animals and summon spirits, and called the Guangdong defenders to his side. Thanks to this, he gathered another 100 million undead troops and ordered them to prepare to defend the fifth line. After this, he took up the taming of animals, strengthening the army with mutated poisonous insects and vipers. Following this, his entire new army, under his command, moved towards the fifth line of defense. However, Zeing had expended too much energy on all this, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to move at the same pace. However, he did not give up, and having arrived at the fifth line of defense, he activated the spell Fiery Purgatory for 10,000 kilometers, then Hellish Sword and Spikes of the Abyss for the same distance. Meanwhile, he raised the Source of Spiritual Origin to the maximum, and could now summon any creature of heaven and earth into battle. So Zeing finally brought all his 5 talents to their maximum and combined them into one. The pain and pressure from the new force was unbearable, but Zeing did not give up and tried to hold on to her. After this, Zeing finally returned to the others after a long time. However, now he looked a little different. His short, dark hair was long and white. This raised many questions among his comrades, but Zeing explained that the drastic change was due to the fact that he had completed his preparations for battle. After that, he announced that the monsters would soon reach the fifth line of defense, and he had something to say before the decisive battle. The young man admitted that the so-called 5 divine geniuses of the Northwest did not exist. In fact, it was him all this time. This caused a violent reaction from everyone. No one could believe that Zeing, who was considered a coward and deserter, had gained such power. He also stated that all their forces were concentrated on the fifth line of defense, and if they lost, there would be no turning back. And although they had prepared as much as possible, it was still not enough for victory. Especially because of the S-class and above behind enemy lines, Zeing decided to gather a suicide squad with special abilities to enter the portal together and launch a counterattack. Zeing said he needed about 10 such fighters, and the first to volunteer was Tien. She was only 9 years old, but she was already ready to sacrifice herself. Xingyi also declared that he was willing to go with them. At 23 years old, he was a genius of the 130th generation of the Chu clan and possessed the aura of a field at the peak of an ancient god. Chang'e also joined them. He was 25 years old, but he was already a master of spirit control, and the peak of his power was equal to an ancient god. Sui and Ying, 18-year-old members of the Qin clan, ancient god-level plant spirit summoners, were also willing to side with Zeing. They were also joined by Changkong, a 23-year-old ancient god-level water elemental prodigy. Meanwhile, Yuan, who was only 22 years old and had no outstanding abilities, wanted to join them, but she was ready to be in charge of supplies and had a divine level of cooking. Lang also joined Zeing's squad. At 23 years old, she had level 10 perception and intelligence skills, and with her was Care, 3 years younger, but with a level 10 gift of time retrospection. Meanwhile, Zishan, Zeing's sister, also expressed her desire to join because their father was very worried about him and she could not leave her brother alone. Lianyi and Xiaonan from the pharmaceutical department also wanted to join Zeing, noting that one doctor would clearly not be enough. After this, Zeing announced that the Suicide Rapid Counterattack Squad had been officially formed. Following this, under Zeing's orders, the squad launched a counterattack against the alien creatures. However, before the battle began, Tien transferred everyone to another world and created a small house there where they could rest, cook food, create potions, and much more. In addition, in this world, time flowed in sync with the outside world, so this house could be considered a separate universe, free from interference, and its name was the Nest of Peace. Zeing was a little confused because their main mission was to attack the monsters first, so there was no point in relaxing so much. But the others reminded him that they were people, including him, and rest was vital for them, so taking a little breather before a great battle wouldn't hurt. Besides, none of them had slept for 3 days, and in such a state it would be difficult to fight the foreigners with dignity. Changkong was incredibly surprised when he saw the house and said that it was literally his dream house. Changge did not share his delight and was strangely surprised when he opened the door and saw what was inside. He noted that he had the feeling that they were all leaving for eternity with peace. Tien replied that she was very glad that everyone liked everything, and this surprised Changge even more. However, almost no one had the strength to speak, and the only thing the guys wanted now was to have a good rest. While some decided to rest, others began to look around, checking the kitchen and storage area. Zeing also noted that he felt something strange, as if the sun was shining and a light wind was blowing, as if after the end of the world. Meanwhile, Yuan was already busy cooking in the kitchen, promising to throw a real festive dinner before the battle. Meanwhile, Sui and Ying took up growing fresh vegetables, which didn't take long, as they were both plant spirit summoners. At this time, Xiaonan and Lianyi were amazed at Tian's power, which was able to teleport all their equipment to the new world. In addition to the pharmacy, Tien was also able to recreate the hospital for Zishan. At the same time, Lan and Kier were getting ready for reconnaissance, having previously established void reconnaissance points 30 kilometers from the gate. After some time, Yuan had already set the table and asked everyone to sit down quickly. When everyone gathered in one place, Zing wanted to tell the guys about the battle plan, but Jinghe asked to hear him out first, noting that the teleportation portals in the front and back courtyards were ready. The front one could be used to return to the fifth line of defense in case of an emergency. Through the back one, you get to the void gate, and on the handle of the back door there is a red button, by pressing which you can get to the reconnaissance point 30 kilometers from the gate, where Len and Kier are on duty. Xinghe also pointed out that Yuan, Lianyi, Xiaonan, and Zishan would remain in the nest of peace for the rear, as they were not fighters. But Zishan countered that although she was not a warrior, she was still a healer and could help on the battlefield. Zeing did not try to dissuade her and announced that after dinner everyone would have 3 hours to rest, after which they would begin their advance. Lianyi and Xiaonan were unhappy that they were called weak in battle, but they did not argue, realizing that they would be more useful in the rear. It was a truly peaceful time. For the first time in years, the boys were able to catch their breath and forget about the monsters, even if only for a couple of hours. A few hours later, the squad headed to the attack, and at that time, Lan and Kaer detected the aura of 1,000,000 awakened ones, in addition to the foreigners. Judging by their clothing, these were the same million Buddhas from the country of Asen. Meanwhile, at the Gate of Emptiness, they set up an ambush of 1,000,000 Buddhas, whose minimum level was 8th and whose maximum was Old God. Everything was exactly as Lan and Kier had reported. 1,000,000 Buddhas were waiting for them at the gates, who immediately declared that the fight was pointless, because the aliens were true gods, the embodiment of the highest Buddhist wisdom. But his words did not cause fear in the boys. On the contrary, they only fueled their determination to fight. After that, everyone rushed into the attack at once to prove that they were not second-rate monsters but true defenders of humanity. Buddha regarded their stubbornness and desire for victory as stupidity and attacked first. However, the guys also had something to respond with, and moreover, to demonstrate their superiority. After this, a fierce battle began, the outcome of which determined the future fate of humanity. But it was not without its problems. The 1,000,000 Buddhas acted as a single formation, their strength surpassing Ziying's detachment. And the Buddha's body crumbled and reformed to wear down the enemy early on. As a result, they had to change tactics. And the first thing they had to do was to break the enemy's line, no matter how difficult it might be. At that moment, they were attacked by the 9,000 fists in one technique, but Tien managed to instantly teleport them away. Following this, she transferred them directly to the enemy, and Zeing immediately used the skill Forbidden Spell Strike. In this way, he was able to shake the enemy's line a little, after which Shakya, the chief guard, immediately tried to restore the protective barrier. Meanwhile, the Diamond Guards posed a particular threat, one of whom was Vijay. He was taken on by Changge. Sini attacked the second guard named Anup, who was no less strong. Changkong fought with the third guardian named Deepak. Sui and Ying attacked the fourth guard named Raj. At this time, Zeing summoned the undead and sent them against the other Buddhas. However, the opponents were not about to give up either, and the stubbornness of Zeing and his comrades only angered them even more. As a result, Shakya hit Zeing with a mental attack that nearly caused his head to explode. However, his rage and determination helped him repel the enemy's attack, and he immediately counterattacked Shakya. Shakya became furious, especially after Zeing said that he was not a Buddha at all, but a yellow-browed monster from the Temple of Little Thunder. In response, he unleashed one of his strongest attacks, but Zeing used the 5-element Hell Array and managed to destroy it. After this, he found himself right in front of Shakya and was ready to deliver the decisive blow. Zeing cast the forbidden spell Lava Asura and attacked the enemy. Shakya tried to defend himself with the diamond mantra, but Zeing did not stop and used Ice Asura and Shackles. As a result, Shakya was defeated and immediately disappeared, which surprised Zeing. Could an S-class alien really have appeared, since in a past life this meant the end of humanity? At that moment he heard his father's voice and, turning around, saw Shakya holding him hostage and ordering him to surrender, claiming that the foreign gods had taken an interest in him and would spare him if they submitted. Meanwhile, the boys continued to fight the guards, which was very difficult, and upon hearing Xiangshan's voice, they lost their guard and barely survived. Luckily, Tien quickly teleported them to safety, and Zishan immediately healed them. At the same time, Xinghe continued to fight with Anup and told the others not to be distracted, but to trust Zeing. Chang'e agreed with him and continued the battle. Changkong also did not lag behind and, despite attacks with fire and poison, did not give up. Shakya was furious and couldn't understand why they didn't realize he could kill their leader's father. Zeing didn't jump to conclusions and asked his father if he really wanted him to kneel down to save him. At that moment, Tien intervened, offering to teleport Xiangshan, but Zeing refused, asking her to focus on protecting others. In response to his son's question, Xiangshan replied that of course he wanted him to save him, and at that very moment, Zeing teleported behind Shakya and attacked. He didn't just ask this question. He was convinced that it wasn't his father in front of him, but an S-class stranger. The stranger was amazed at how Zeing had exposed him and asked about it, but the youth did not want to talk and attacked again. Zeing struck one after another as if it wasn't an S-class alien, but an ordinary mob. In reality, the enemy's strength lay in illusions and shape-shifting. But for Zeing, this didn't matter. He was obsessed with destroying monsters. However, the stranger managed to penetrate his consciousness and showed him memories of his family. In these memoirs, the father never interfered in his son's personal affairs, even when he was beaten, so that he would become strong and be able to protect his loved ones. Thus he taught him to fight back, even if the enemy was older and stronger, and awakened confidence in him. When Xiangshan watched his son fight for his own and not give up, it made him proud. He himself never showed weakness. Even when he suffered, he continued to smile and joke. Zeing was furious and couldn't understand how the stranger knew about his family, because he couldn't penetrate his mind. He explained that he had taken memories from his father's mind, and added that with such power, Zeing was indeed capable of killing him. However, the stranger had a major trump card in their battle. He actually managed to capture Xiangshan. He noted that Xiangshan received the wounds he received while fighting on the defensive line, so it could be said that he saved him by dragging him along with him. And now he believes that the time has come to repay the debt. At the same time, Leng informed Zeing that it was indeed Xiangshan. She had just received a message from the 5th line of defense about his sudden disappearance on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the stranger had completely merged with Xiangshan's blood, and now he had literally become his father. If you let your father go, you let the stranger go. If you kill the stranger, your father will die too. This really left Zeing stumped and he didn't know what to do. However, Zeing still decided to attack the stranger, despite the risk of harming his father. Using the forbidden lava spell, Zeing easily struck the alien, and it didn't even try to resist. After this, Zeing seemed to lose himself and couldn't believe what he had just done. At this time, the guys were fighting off the parasites, and Tien became curious as to why Zeing couldn't bring back Xiangshan right now, since he could summon the dead. Zishan replied that he probably couldn't summon those who had fallen on the battlefields with aliens. Meanwhile, they exterminated the beetles, which were incredibly tenacious. But with the help of Sui and Ying's abilities, they were able to defeat them. At the same time, the guards were trying to escape, as they had lost their true appearance and main trump card. However, the boys weren't going to let them escape after everything that had happened. While Changkong grabbed one guard, Chang'e grabbed another, and in an instant, they were finished. Zeing also decided to keep up the good work and, using Asura's Hell on Earth mode, cleared the battlefield of monsters. At that time, Sui and Ying caught the last guard and destroyed him, and a memorial tree grew at the site of his death. Meanwhile, dawn broke, and Zeing summoned all the fallen Buddhas and ordered them to attack the other monsters. At the same time, Yuan moved through the portal to them, preparing a small snack for the boys. And while the boys were getting together, Zeing asked Ying to plant a tree on the spot where his father died, because he was afraid he would not be able to find him later. Zeing was sure that he would meet his father again, but now it was more important to rest, regain his strength, and rush into battle again. Meanwhile, Chang'e tried to maintain the team's fighting spirit and encouraged the boys in every possible way, saying that a great battle awaited them ahead. In addition, Zeing instructed Leng to compile the Alien Handbook and transmit it in real time to the fifth line of defense fighters. The first was the Succubus, an S-class alien capable of creating illusions and possessing bodies, but with weak defense. At the same time, Lan received a report from the fifth line of defense. An S-class alien named Sonic Bat King had appeared on the front lines. Meanwhile, the Void Gate ejected a whole horde of A-class aliens, and the situation on the fifth line became increasingly critical. Zeing declared that he would go to the fifth line of defense with Tien to help the others, and asked the rest of the guys to deal with the A-class in this world. Meanwhile, the situation on the fifth line of defense was critical, but thanks to Zeing's previously established formations, it was possible to at least contain it somewhat. The army of beasts also held back the onslaught of the monsters and put up a worthy fight. The army of the undead also did not retreat and fought desperately, defending humanity. The biggest threat was the S-class alien, which used sound waves to instantly destroy any target. Its waves caused explosions of energy in people's bodies, causing them to self-destruct. No one could cope with him. So Zai ordered everyone to retreat to the underground fortifications to save their strength. By that time, Zeing had already arrived at the fifth line of defense and was struck by the alien's sonic attack. He then used the forbidden sound element spell, Great Sound Silence, to muffle the attack and preserve the city's fighting ability. After that, he wanted to strike the alien, but it had incredible speed and easily dodged. In addition to sonic attacks, the alien could also plunge the enemy into darkness. But Zeing had an answer. Using the forbidden spell Light, he instantly cut through his darkness. Then the alien attacked with sound again, and Zeing tried to block the attack with the silencing spell, but without amplification it was weak, so he amplified it 100-fold. However, even this was not enough. He increased the spell by 1,000, 10,000, and finally 1,000,000 times, and only in this way did he manage to repel the attack. But the sound spells absorbed too many source stones. In addition, the soundproofing dome was too large and fragile, and the alien could easily penetrate it. Zeing had to strengthen it 3 billion times. Even though the youth had around 500 trillion origin stones, wasting them on such attacks was too wasteful. Zeing asked Tien to find a way to teleport him and the alien away from the fifth line of defense. But as soon as she tried to do so, the alien immediately attacked her. Tien was seriously injured, and miraculously, Zeing managed to capture her with the Forbidden Wood spell, Protection, after which he handed her over to Zai, asking him to take care of her. At this time, Zeing continued to hold back the alien's attacks and at the same time thought of how to defeat him. By using the same forbidden spell, Soundwave, and amplifying it 100 million times, Zeing managed to hit the alien. Moreover, he damaged his eardrums and thus further angered the enemy. He tried to attack with sound again, and Zeing responded in kind, amplifying his attack 100 million times. However, the alien possessed incredible strength, and Zeing had very few origin stones left, so he needed to deal one decisive blow. Since the sound waves created by forbidden magic had a limited amount of energy but consumed origin stones, Zeing decided to try to transform ordinary sound into a weapon. He used the forbidden spell Sound Transformation, but his efforts weren't enough, so if 1,000,000 people screamed at once, the attack would definitely work. Meanwhile, the alien managed to break through the soundproof dome and made its way to the people. The young man cast the forbidden spell Dome of Silence 500 million times, but he knew the barrier would not last long, so he asked Zai to give the order to all the inhabitants to scream. Zai did not fully understand Zeing's plan, but immediately conveyed to all citizens, "Shout with him. This is necessary for victory." After this, everyone shouted in one voice, "Dacia will win!" And the animals and even the undead shouted along with the people. At this moment, Zeing activated the forbidden spell Sound Absorption and directed the attack at the alien. He was confident that such power would be enough to finish off the enemy once and for all. Zeing cast Sound Transformation and Sound Wave, stacking them 1,000,000,000 times. Despite the alien's attempts to defend himself and counterattack, it did not help him. and he found himself pinned down. As a result, through the combined efforts of all the inhabitants and armies, the alien was defeated, and the roar of the dragon Zeing was heard by all the people of Daxia. After this, Zeing wanted to immediately head to the Void Gate to prevent another invasion, and asked Zai to report any appearance of such enemies. Meanwhile, Tien's condition was critical, and she had almost no strength left to teleport. However, she was able to create a portal to another world so that Zeing and the others could return, after which she lost consciousness. At this time, at the gates of the Void, the guys fought with all their might, preventing the monsters from breaking through to the ordinary world. No one acted alone. Everyone understood that victory was only possible with complete coordination. As a result, the guys dealt with all the monsters and were finally able to take a little rest. Xinghe remarked that he was curious to see how Zeing was doing, to which Changkong replied that in their situation, no news was already good news. Xinghe added that after the waves of A-class monsters were teleported, the gates would stop working for a while, meaning there was some principle to the teleportation. After that, he asked Len to record all teleportation emissions and monster levels. At the same time, a new rift was activated, which no one expected. At this moment, Zeing returned to the Nest of Peace, and, running to Xiaonan and Lianyi, asked them to carefully examine Tien. Xiaonan immediately gave her a gentle recovery remedy, but warned that recovery would take time, and her internal wounds were serious, and even after waking up, she would not be able to use her abilities. At this time, Leng informed Zeing that a new S-class alien, whose abilities were still unknown, had appeared at the Void Gate, and added that Xinghe wanted to convey that if they couldn't handle it themselves, they were unworthy of being his comrades. Meanwhile, the country of Migo had fallen. 1,000,000 awakened traders, led by an alien S-class space ripper, were moving towards the 5th line of defense and were supposed to arrive in 5 hours. However, after the battle with the Sound King, Zeing had almost no primordial stones left, and without them, he was literally nothing, and without teleportation it was impossible to replenish them. Lianyan suggested using the elixir she had created the day before. It briefly increases physical strength, but burns out vital energy. Zeing replied that he couldn't use it on a 9-year-old girl, and for now he would fly for the Source Stones, calling on the Hawks. Tien had already woken up by that time and said that she was ready to take the elixir, but Zeing replied that there was no elixir. She had dreamed it all. However, Tien realized that he was lying, and despite his attempts to dissuade her and convince her not to be stubborn, she said that she stubbornly pretended to be mute, and also stubbornly followed him. After these words, she teleported the elixir to herself and immediately swallowed it. Her body suddenly rose into the air and something strange began to happen. But after just a couple of seconds, Tien returned to normal and was ready to use her abilities. After this, Zeing asked Xiaonan to prepare some elixir for him too, and at the same time, Yuan came to them, saying that if they were going to leave, they should definitely eat beforehand. Meanwhile, Xinghe, Changge, Changkong, as well as Sui and Ying, tried to resist the alien S-class without Zeing's help. Changge decided to use his puppets to attack first, activating the ghost control threads. After this, his mini-army went into battle, but quickly fell as the alien attacked them with corrosion, which instantly ate away the puppets' bodies. In order to somehow stop the corrosion, Changkong used the skill Boundless Ocean, Water Cube, and was able to temporarily stop its spread. He then sealed the alien's corrosion into a cube, but was unable to completely suppress it, only temporarily contain it. However, the alien's attacks continued, and to protect themselves, Sui and Ying recreated a shield from the root plates. Xinghe, meanwhile, said that while the cube held the corrosion, they needed to find a way to attack the alien and find its weak spot. To which Ying replied that they could grow flammable plants that would need to be set on fire. After this, Sui and Ying grew flammable plants and bound the alien with them, and Xinghe, using the sword qi that could create sparks, went to set them on fire. Although the plan worked and the alien was set on fire, it had another peculiarity. It could divide and grow back. The guys found themselves in a difficult situation, but since they wanted to prove their strength to Zeing, they began to come up with a new plan. Meanwhile, the drops of corrosion that Sui and Ying had held back with the shield had almost eaten away at it. And an additional problem was that they couldn't control the black rain, which was not water but fission particles. Xinghe noted that fire attacks could destroy its core and slow down its regeneration a little, but only from a distance. And if they could get to its core, they could set it on fire. Zishan, to whom Tien left spatial bubbles, could help them with this. Meanwhile, Zishan finally reached them and initially wanted to heal Xinghe, but he replied that there was no need for that yet, and asked if her holy light could neutralize the corrosion. Following this, Zeing created a holy shield, and although it didn't last long, it did indeed hold back the corrosion. But with her powers, such a shield could only be created twice. After that, Xinghe and Zishan went to search for the alien core, and Xinghe also asked Sui and Ying to create flammable and explosive seeds, and Chang'e to use large puppets to return the seeds and accurately throw them into the core. Gathering their resolve, the boys headed straight into the heart of the monster, confident that the plan would work. At the same time, they attacked the other with a joint attack. Xinghe used the Field of 10,000 Swords, and Zishan used the skill Enveloping with Holy Light. Thanks to this, they quickly found the alien's core, and all that remained was to destroy it. However, it was necessary to act very quickly, since the alien was regenerating at a high speed. However, Chang'e's puppets managed to plant explosive and flammable seeds into the core, and all that was left was to set them on fire. After that, Xinghe activated the aura field Sword Chi Clash and detonated the seeds, destroying the alien's core. Meanwhile, after the death of the alien, the entire water cube was barely holding together and could explode at any moment, so the guys needed to get out urgently. This battle showed how well-coordinated and confidently the guys can act, even without Zeing's help. Having moved to a safe place, Zishan destroyed the bubble, and the boys were finally able to exhale. Following this, Xinghe asked Zishan to heal him if she had any strength left. It was a true triumph, and although the main battle was not yet over, the boys felt relieved because victory over an S-rank alien meant that they could win the Great War too. At the same time, Zeing and Tien were in the southern glacier, trying to get as many source stones as possible from the penguins. They also managed to find the last mine of primogems on Blue Star, and with this supply collected, they hoped it would last until the end of the war. Having collected all the stones, Zeing decided to resurrect the penguins, make them part of his army of beasts, and send them to the fifth line of defense to fight for humanity and the Blue Star. Tien became curious as to why, on his way here, Zeing had summoned the souls of fallen heroes from all countries except Huaxia. Zeing explained that this was because of his personal attachment to Huaxia, because he dreamed that after this external war, there would be no internal conflicts in the human world, no hegemony, no racial wars, so that ordinary people could simply live. Tien said that Zeing is an idealist, and although his dream is difficult, it is beautiful, and she also wants to see the day he talks about. After that, having collected the stones and increased their army, Zeing and Tien set out to meet the spacebreaker.